Chapter 360, Soul-Chopping Sword. Nethan stood in the dimly lit forge, watching Caesar examine the spring fruit. It was nothing more than a low-grade devil fruit used for testing, hardly worth fretting over. If the spring fruit could bond so cleanly with a simple porcelain cup, Nethan was confident the far more powerful soul fruit would fuse just as well with the legendary demon sword Muramura. "All right," he said. "Let's begin." Caesar nodded and carefully cradled the soul fruit. He turned to the sword laid out on the stone table and paused. "Lord Nethan, you should know this won't be quick. Merging a devil fruit's essence with a weapon takes time, anywhere from 2 weeks to a month." Nethan inclined his head. "I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes." Relief flashed across Caesar's face. He reached out and gripped Muramura's hilt. No sooner had his fingers closed around the cold metal than a savage surge of consciousness blasted from the blade, slamming into Caesar's mind like a living torrent. Kill, madness, blood, shadows. The sword's dark will roared in Caesar's head, demanding violence and death. Caesar's knuckles whitened as he fought for control. Nethan's eyes widened. He had expected resistance from the blade, but not this raw, primal onslaught. This was no mere weapon. It was a ravenous entity, thirsting for blood and chaos. And now it was fighting back. Nethan took a cautious step forward, ready to intervene if Caesar faltered. Around them, the forge fell silent under the weight of Muramura's furious will. The true test of their bond had only just begun. Terrifying waves of malice washed over him, and Caesar let out a strangled scream. His grip on the sword's hilt slipped, and in an instant he dissolved into a glimmering orb of mist, rolling across the deck before solidifying a few yards away. Heart-pounding, he forced himself to look at the true source of his fear, the demon blade Murasame, its wicked edge buried deep in the wood. "Lord Nethan, your demon sword, Murasame," Caesar stammered, voice trembling. In that moment, every scrap of knowledge he had about the blade flooded back. One of the legendary 12 supreme swords, feared in every harbor. Old tales claimed each of its wielders eventually lost their sanity. Many already whispered that Nethan was teetering on the brink, but no one dared think the blade could actually turn on him. Nethan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He had underestimated Murasame's willfulness, and if Caesar couldn't subdue it, the so-called reformation was in jeopardy. Caesar drew himself up, brushing off the shock. "It's just a weapon," he said coolly. "Besides, I'm a genius scientist." The laboratory was silent, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional drip of condensation from the overhead pipes. In the center of the room, beneath a bright inspection lamp, lay the demon blade Murasame, sheathed now in a layer of restraining sigils and fastened securely atop a stainless steel test bench. Even so, its presence was unsettling. Caesar didn't flinch. He'd seen worse things in this facility, mutated beasts, bioengineered abominations, even humanoid subjects whose biology had been rewritten from scratch. A cursed sword was hardly cause for alarm. After securing final authorization from Rhodes, he'd swiftly neutralized Murasame's aura with a custom binding spell. Then, with steady hands, he had sealed it inside a reinforced glass vessel. Now, leaning over a separate counter, Caesar carefully reached for the soul fruit nestled in a petri dish. The translucent globe pulsed with otherworldly energy. He cut it open, extracted its viscous core, and set to work with a series of delicate instruments. Minutes later, he held a small vial of iridescent liquid, its color shifting between violet and green whenever it caught the light. With meticulous precision, Caesar poured the fluid into the glass chamber containing Murasame. The moment the liquid touched the blade's surface, it hissed and crackled, tiny bubbles racing along, metal. Caesar snapped on a pair of high-magnification goggles and peered in, watching the solution seep into the sword's grain like ink in water. A frown creased his brow. Something about the way the liquid spread, the speed at which it penetrated, didn't fit his calculations. He set the goggles aside and rubbed his temple. "What is it?" asked Nethan, stepping forward. He'd been Nethan ever since the mission briefing, not Ross, and he was every bit as curious as Caesar looked. Caesar cleared his throat, embarrassed. "The metal in this blade is unusual. Actually, the demon spirit bound to it is extremely strong. It resists devil fruit fusion." Nethan's face didn't flicker. "And," Caesar rubbed his palms together, "fusion won't fail, but it'll take time. Probably 6 weeks to a month, maybe longer. Nathan raised an eyebrow. At most, Caesar peered through his magnifying instrument, considering. 3 months, tops. That's acceptable. Nathan frowned for only a moment before relaxing. 3 months was nothing to him, and Wangguo still needed time to settle. The world government had only just formed. Trouble was inevitable. I'll leave it in your hands. Understood, Caesar replied. Only after Nathan departed did Caesar finally exhale. Handling ordinary people was one thing, but facing Nathan, one of the 4 emperors, always raised the stakes. 2.5 months passed. During the past 2.5 months, the world government unleashed a series of punitive strikes. First, they crushed underground networks tied to the 10,000 kingdoms. Then they wiped out Nathan's West Sea stronghold and drove the Ghost Hand pirates from its waters. Nathan scarcely batted an eye. His rebellion in the Holy Land, Mary Joa, had already been exposed, and everyone knew he'd come perilously close to toppling that sacred realm. In light of his audacious coup attempt, the government's retaliation felt almost half-hearted, but it was the best they could do. They simply lacked the resources to attack every nation in the world. As long as they refrained from meddling in the 10,000 kingdoms themselves, Nathan saw no reason to respond. The world government had suffered a humiliating defeat, and the 5 elders were beside themselves with fury. Yet 2.5 months later, Caesar's daunting experiment was finally complete. He had fused the demon sword Muramura with the soul fruit. Elation surged through him as he raced back to the hidden base to deliver the news. Nathan didn't hesitate for a second. He was there moments later. Now, everything was ready. Nathan stood before the glass containment, staring at the demon sword Muramame. Moments ago, its blade had been bathed in a special fluid, but now that liquid was gone, wholly absorbed by the sword itself. Instead of the usual polished surface that merely reflected light, Muramame's steel now throbbed with its own eerie glow. Faint, wraith-like shadows curled and unfurled beneath the blade's dark luster, as if some hidden force had come alive. "Be careful," Caesar warned in a low voice at Nathan's side. He had long understood the tyrannical will that lurked within Muramame, and ever since the soul fruit had been fused into the blade, his unease had deepened. No one could say how that will might warp or magnify when unleashed. Caesar's eyes never left the sword. "It's no longer just a demon sword," he said softly. "From now on, we should call it the Soul Chopper." Nathan felt a chill creep down his spine. The blade's inner light pulsed again, as though in response, and he realized that Muramame, now truly the Soul Chopper, was awakening. Nathan inclined his head in calm acknowledgement, then reached out and gripped Murasame's hilt. As a dignified emperor, and the undisputed strongest man on the seas, he would not cower before a mere blade. No matter how potent its spirit, it was still only steel, powerless without a hand to wield it. Chapter 361, Fusion. Nathan's hand closes around the hilt of the blade. The moment his fingers touch the damasked steel, an eerie, iridescent glow blooms along the edge of Muramura, the demon knife. Though the shimmer emits no tangible force, it tears at Nathan's own energy, wrenching his power out of balance. The air around him ripples with distortion as a soft whispering echoes through the chamber. In an instant, every piece of glassware within reach explodes into a cloud of jagged fragments. Porcelain and crystal shards rain outward. Caesar, standing too close, morphs into a swirling mass of gas, his Logia ability saving him from harm, though his consciousness flickers with shock. He drifts there, terrified, unable to tear his gaze from the knife. Muramura has awakened in its truest form, a living embodiment of malice and madness. Legends spoke of its nightmare power, but now it pulses under Nathan's grip, hungry for blood and chaos. If its dark will seizes him, Cake Island will burn to ash. The Ghost Hand pirates will fall, and even Admiral Fujitora's fleet may not be swift enough to stop a man consumed by demon steel. Nathan's breath comes in ragged bursts. He forces himself to focus on the knife's hilt, refusing to yield to its whispers. Calm, he tells himself. Master it before it masters you. With every ounce of willpower, he holds on. Caesar pressed himself into the far corner of the lab, his face ashen, eyes wide with terror. Click, click. A warping power rippled through the air. Steel-reinforced floor tiles fractured in jagged patterns beneath Nathan's feet. The walls, built from a rare, ultra-durable alloy, moaned as invisible forces strained their molecular bonds. The metal test bench before Nathan groaned, then buckled inch by inch, twisting into a grotesque shape until it splintered apart. Shards of glass and twisted wires exploded outward, rain against the shattered flooring. Through the chaos, Nathan felt it, the sword's will flooding toward him like a tidal wave of dread. This was not mere malice in the blade itself, but the soul fruit's ancient power waking within Murasame. Its presence crushed the air, demanding he give in to fear, and promising unspeakable consequences if he did. But Nathan's gaze did not waver. He stood motionless amid the wreckage, eyes cold and unblinking, fixed on the demon sword in his hand. In that silent calm, he alone defied the outrage of power unleashed all around him. Nathan watched the demon sword's will writhe inside him and allowed himself the barest of smirks. Had he only just arrived in this world, he might have buckled under the combined power of the soul fruit and the sword's own malignant consciousness. But he was no newcomer. He was one of the 4 emperors who ruled the seas, the only man ever to stand victorious over Whitebeard. In matters of willpower, few could hope to match him. Since first claiming the cursed blade Murasame, Nathan had battled its rebellious mind over and over. Each time, his ruthless determination had crushed the sword's defiance until it grudgingly knelt before him. Now, merged with the soul fruit, Murasame's will had swelled in strength, fueled by its newfound abilities, and it dared to revolt once more. "Is that the best you can muster?" Nathan drawled, his voice as cold as the ocean depths. In that instant, the sovereign presence he radiated flared to life. A tide of oppressive energy roared outward, shredding the sword's consciousness and hurling it from his body like a discarded husk. The air around Nathan crackled with raw power, and in that moment it was clear. No force, demonic or divine, would break his resolve. Nathan focused every ounce of his conqueror's haki into the edge of the demon sword, Murasame, unleashing an oppressive force that hammered directly at the blade's will. With a sharp clang, Murasame trembled under the onslaught. Even a demonic sword, infused with the fabled soul fruit, could not withstand the impact of Nathan's haki. After all, not even Big Mom herself, bolstered by that devil Fru, it could break through his resolve. A mere sword stood no chance. Under the weight of his ambition, the resistance within Murasame shattered, crushed by Nathan's overwhelming presence. When the soul fruit's power is defeated, what remains? A human at least retains a body and mind. A sword does not. It has no flesh, no spirit of its own to cling to, only the borrowed will of its devil fruit. In their previous duel, Murasame had tried to devour Nathan with that very power, but against his haki it proved as fragile as jelly. Now, stripped of its defenses, the demon blade lay broken before him, its dark hunger extinguished. Nathan drove his will deep into the living gel without hesitation. Murasame, the demon sword, possessed no true consciousness of its own, only a faint, fragmented echo of sword will. The moment Nathan's intent collided with that echo, it shattered completely. In its place, the sword's latent power intertwined with the energy of the soul fruit, and before he knew it, his own will wove itself into that fused might. A thrill of astonishment ran through Nathan. The blade in his hand felt as if it had become part of his own body, an extra arm or pair of fingers, wholly subject to his commands. He could sense the soul fruit's power pooling within Murasame, ready to be unleashed with a single thought. He couldn't explain how this bond had formed, only that it was an extraordinary advantage. "Lo, Lord Nathan?" Caesar pressed himself against the far wall, his voice trembling. As the strange energies around them faded, he stared at Nathan with wide, fearful eyes. When Nathan remained perfectly still, Caesar's trepidation obliged him to ask the question aloud. Nathan remained perfectly still, lost in the intoxicating sense of oneness with the Muramura blade. It felt as though the sword had fused with his very essence. "My lord?" Caesar's voice broke the silence, laced with growing alarm. Nathan didn't respond. A cold dread crept up Caesar's spine. If Nathan was truly under the sword's control, what horrors might follow? Would he turn on them all? Even if he spared them, Captains Luo and Lafitte would never show mercy. They'd see Nathan as a threat and strike without hesitation. Caesar's fear swelled until he felt on the verge of tears. Then, as suddenly as he'd gone under, Nathan's eyes snapped open. He blinked once, twice, as if waking from a long, deep sleep. His gaze swept over the ruined test bench and the cracked floor beneath his feet, then settled on Caesar, standing frozen in the corner. "Excellent work," Nathan said softly. "As for this mess, Captain Luo can handle the repairs." With that, he turned and strode out of the laboratory. In his hand gleamed the newly acquired demon sword. No, the soul-slashing sword Miramura, and a fierce anticipation lit his eyes. He couldn't wait to unleash its full power. When Nathan spoke, Caesar froze for a heartbeat, then a broad smile broke across his face. Of course the ghost hand was still its own entity. No blade, no matter how sharp, could seize control of it. He'd played his part in protecting it, and that meant he might be closer than ever to reclaiming his heart. A surge of triumph pulsed through him. Chapter 362, Making Hormes. Nathan stepped out of Caesar's laboratory and into the gloomy hallways of Rhodes's prison, where the Empire's most notorious pirates and smugglers were confined. Officially, these men had been captured for raiding the world's trade routes. In truth, many were just unfortunate souls caught in Shilyu the Rain's merciless onslaught. Survivors pressed into Caesar's service as test subjects for Luo's secret experiments on phantom limbs, grimly nicknamed ghost hands. A ripple of fear swept through the row of chained prisoners the moment Nathan appeared. Whispers passed from cell to cell. The Four-Emperor himself, the pirate who shattered entire fleets. Their terror was understandable. Legends said that even Nathan's own captains had fallen beneath his wrath, their ships torn apart in a single devastating strike. Yet a handful remained defiantly unmoved, their eyes burning with scorn. Nathan's dark gaze settled on the boldest among them, a burly man whose glare dared him to come closer. Without a word, Nathan drew Murasame, the demon-forged sword infamous across the seas. In one fluid motion, he swung the blade at the heavy iron bar that sealed the prisoner's cell. Sparks flew. The metal groaned and snapped, shards clattering to the cold stone floor. The prisoner's bravado vanished. Shackles rattled as he sank to his knees, every muscle trembling. He had no chance to flee or fight. Murasame's edge had already proven its merciless precision. With a calm flick, Nathan sheathed his sword and leaned close, his voice a low whisper that carried through the silent corridor. "Remember this moment. Your fate lies in my hands. Cooperate, and you may yet see freedom. Resist me, and you'll spend the rest of your days haunted by what you failed to stop." A hush fell over the other inmates, their defiance extinguished by the unyielding presence of the pirate emperor. Nathan turned on his heel and walked away, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his warning and the shattered remains of iron that could no longer hold him back. Nathan's blade never touched the prisoner himself. Instead, it sliced clean through the iron bars of the cage, cleaving it in half at the waist. The other inmates stared in astonishment, wondering what he planned next. Their confusion turned to horror when a pale, ethereal mist seeped from the wounded man's body, coalescing into a ghostly, humanoid shape. A half-smile curved Nathan's lips. Murasame. His sword fused with the power of the soul fruit and reborn as the soul chopping blade, hummed in his hand. With a single, graceful arc, he swept the blade through the shimmering apparition. In an instant, the wisp of life essence was severed and dissipated. The prisoner's eyes rolled back, their irises gone, and he crumpled to the floor. This was the dreaded soul torture technique. Under Nathan's fear-inducing presence, a victim's life force materialized as a visible mass, and the soul-chopping blade could rip it away at will. A terrifying power, granted by the soul fruit, wielded now without mercy. Nathan watched the remnants of the drifting souls swirl around Murasame. Satisfied, he gave a small nod and lifted his sword. Under Nathan's command, the gathered souls streamed into the empty iron cage, vanishing one by one into its bars. The metal suddenly glowed with a strange, pulsing light, contorting as if alive. When the radiance died away, the cage itself stood transformed, its surface bristling with eyes and a solemn speaking mouth. "Master," the living cage intoned, bowing its steel form respectfully to Nathan. He regarded it coolly. His soul fruit power not only stripped souls and lifespans, but, like Big Mom, could also breathe life into the dead. This newly born Homes was proof enough. Inside, the imprisoned wretches shrieked in panic, eyes wide as they stared at the animate jailer that now held them captive. Nathan gave a single nod, his hand resting on the hilt of Murasame. "Guard them well. No one escapes." "At once, master," the cage replied, clicking its bars into place as if nodding. Nethan turned his gaze to Murasame, the sentient blade whispering at his side. He sensed its will had fused with his own, its fierce spirit now utterly bound to him. Nethan finally understood that his situation went far beyond merely possessing a sword capable of devouring devil fruits. It was as if he himself had eaten two fruits. The power of the soul fruit was irrevocably bound to the demon blade Murasame, neither growing nor waning, but fixed to the sword alone. This was exactly what Nethan had wanted. A sword that simply obeyed his orders might one day be torn from his grasp, its wielder overriding its will and using its power for themselves. But a sword whose very soul was fused with his own could never be turned against him. Even if someone managed to steal Murasame, they would wield only a lifeless hunk of steel, its true power remaining dormant unless Nethan himself was slain. In effect, there could be only one master of Murasame, and that was Nethan. With this revelation, Nethan decided to put his newfound control to the test. In the shadowy depths of his stronghold, he lined up the hapless prisoners he'd captured and began his experiment. One by one, he reached out, plucking their souls from trembling bodies and weaving those essences into the enchanted chains and cages that confined them. As each spirit sank into the cold, unyielding links, another discovery crystallized in Nethan's mind. The core of Hormize's power wasn't just about binding souls, it was the very manipulation of lifespan itself. Each soul he harvested carried with it the measure of years lived and years yet to come. And now, with Murasame at his side and an unbreakable bond between sword and master, Nethan stood on the brink of unlocking the true extent of Hormize's legacy. Nethan's eyes narrowed as he pieced it all together. If he stripped 30 years of life from a prisoner, he could transfer exactly those 30 years to a single soul, or split them evenly between two, granting each 15. No life was created or lost in the process. It was a straightforward transfer of the soul's remaining time. Suddenly, the true value of the regression fruit became clear. Though it could reverse a person's body to a younger state, it did nothing to replenish the soul's allotted lifespan. An 80-year-old man regressed to a child's body would still age or even die when his soul's original time ran out. True longevity, it turned out, depended not on bodily youth, but on the soul itself. That meant only the surgical fruit could genuinely extend life. And even the so-called soul fruit, capable of ripping years from another's soul, couldn't fuse those stolen years into a living being. One could steal life, but not absorb it to prolong oneself. Nethan realized then that no one could live forever by preying on others. Soul incarnation. The term drifted into his thoughts, weighty with unspoken possibilities. Nethan leaned back, mind racing with the implications of true life transfer, and what it might mean for those daring enough to master it. Nethan had already spent countless hours experimenting with the soul fruit's myriad powers. Now he turned his attention to one of its most mysterious abilities, the creation of soul incarnations. Ordinarily, a soul's strength is tied to its owner's lifespan, yet the devil fruit user themselves is exempt. This meant that Nethan could produce soul clones without sacrificing his own life force. He remembered how Big Mom had deployed multiple incarnations of her soul at once. Every day on Cake Island, she harvested lifespans to populate her territory with homies, advanced familiars like Zeus and Prometheus. If Big Mom could fashion homies from lightning or fire, why shouldn't she harness every elemental force, hurricanes, frost, even earthquakes? A single person wielding so many catastrophic powers could reshape nature itself. Imagine it. Wherever Big Mom traveled, thunder would crack, infernos would blaze skyward, cyclones would scour the earth, and glaciers would spread for miles. All the elements converging in one being. No wonder she stood among the four emperors. And now, Nethan mused, he held the same potential in his hands. Nethan knew that Zeus and Prometheus weren't ordinary homies, they were far more advanced. When fully unleashed, their power rivaled even the three calamities, and they were effectively immortal. Big Mom, on the other hand, was simply a monstrous being, born with an extraordinary body. In many ways, she lacked the true spirit of an emperor. She'd never fought her way up to the top by sheer will and effort. Had the soul fruit ended up in the hands of legends like Whitebeard or red-haired Shanks, its power would have been far greater than anything Big Mom could ever command. Chapter 363, Soul Incarnation. I'll begin by forging a soul incarnation. After a moment's reflection, Nethan steadied his grip on Murasame, his eyes alight with resolve. Having mastered the sword's unique bond with the soul fruit's power, he knew exactly how to proceed. Merge a sliver of his will with the soul fruit's energy, then carve it free with Murasame's edge. This method drew only on the fruit's power and the fragment of his will, leaving his true soul and lifespan untouched, an efficient technique for someone of his skill. He drew in a deep breath and centered himself. Channeling his intention into the blade, he activated the soul fruit's ability. A pale glow crept along Murasame's length, coalescing into a ribbon of pure will. It thickened, vibrating with latent force, until Nethan's eyes blazed. With a deliberate slash, he severed the ribbon from the sword. A soft crackle filled the air as the luminous strand hurtled 10 meters forward, where it collapsed onto the ground in a flicker of dim light. Before him now lay the first fragment of his soul, his own soul incarnation, waiting to take shape. Nethan watched intently as the black mass writhed on the floor. After a few tense seconds, it finally coalesced into a living slime-like creature, an inky black form with 2 gleaming eyes and a small, expressionless mouth. It didn't speak, but Nethan could sense its awareness. This was Hormuz, the very incarnation of his soul, summoned through sheer force of will. Although silent, Hormuz could perceive its surroundings. Still, its consciousness felt tiny, like a single drop of water compared to the ocean of Nethan's own mind. He frowned. Could such a fragile vessel ever muster the strength to seize control of a warrior like Katakuri? He shook his head, steeling himself. There's only one way to find out, he said softly. At that moment, the door swung open. Trafalgaro bustled in, breathless from having raced over at the first word of Nethan's experiment. He slapped Captain Rhodes on the shoulder with a grin. Well, boss, or captain, he teased, switching titles out of habit. Rhodes merely smiled. He'd long since learned not to mind what people called him. Rhodes's gaze settled on the quivering slime. It looks like the summoning worked, he observed. Nethan allowed himself a small nod. The first trial had succeeded, but the true test lay ahead. He met Trafalgaro's eager eyes. All right, he said, voice firm with resolve. Let's see what Hormuz can really do. Trafalgar Law knew at once what had happened. Caesar had succeeded in fusing the cursed blade Murasame with Big Mom's soul fruit. When the cells in that cage sprang to life, Law realized that Nethan's contribution to the experiment had worked. He'd witnessed the attack on Cake Island firsthand, and was well acquainted with the unpredictable properties of Hormuz and the soul fruit's power to capture souls. But this was different. It was Nethan's technique that had made the fusion possible. Whether this dark, viscous avatar could actually seize control of Charlotte Katakuri's body, however, remained anyone's guess. Nethan crouched beside the writhing lump of shadowy slime and shook his head thoughtfully. Law watched him, his expression guarded. Neither of them knew for certain if the creature could perform the kind of mind-swap surgery they planned. All right, Nethan said quietly. Let's give it a shot. Can it strip Katakuri of his will? Law met his gaze and nodded. After everything we've put into this, we can't afford to fail now. He stood up, calm, composed, every inch the strategist. In the pirate world's pecking order, his strength was matched only by the likes of Admiral Fujitora or the Rain swordsman Shiryu, and it wasn't far behind the Fishman heroes. With a shared nod, the two of them set off toward the hidden laboratory, ready to test their bold new weapon on the strongest guardian they'd ever faced. Katakuri lay bound and motionless in the research chamber, just as he had been for the past 18 months. In all that time, the Rhodes organization had tried and failed to break his will. A warrior of his caliber shouldn't be so easily subdued. Otherwise, the so-called infinite hell on the city's 6th tier would mean nothing. At the sound of approaching footsteps, Katakuri's eyes snapped open. They fixed on Nethan, who stood before him without a hint of hesitation. Nethan, having already ascended to the very summit of the seas, was unmoved by even the fiercest glare. Katakuri could pour 10 times the malice into his stare, and Nethan would remain unshaken. After a moment, Katakuri's focus drifted past Nethan's face to something darker, a viscous shadow slithering silently at his back. He knew that form instantly. He had been the commander of the original 4 generals, and was intimately familiar with Big Mom's fearsome soul devil fruit power. That creeping mass was no ordinary slime. It was a soul incarnation. Big Mom herself had long since fallen into Rhodes's captivity. Her devil fruit abilities had been nullified, her loyal Lieutenant Hormuz was dead, and even the soul avatar she'd fashioned had been destroyed. There was only one conclusion. Nethan now wielded the soul fruit. A slow, predatory grin spread across Katakuri's face. "So you've got it," he murmured. "Shall we see exactly what you can do?" He flexed the bronze shackles that held him, ready at last to test the new master of the soul's power. Nethan's words had long since fallen silent. There was nothing left to say. Trafalgaro gave a curt nod, flicking his wrist. Room! In an instant, a translucent dome expanded outward, sealing the entire chamber. With the barrier in place, Trafalgaro raised his hand and drew upon his surgical powers. Across the dome, Katakuri's brow veins pulsed with blue light as he fought to resist. But Trafalgaro of today was a far different opponent. Fresh from his victory over the Big Mom pirates, his mastery of the mind exchange techniques had reached new heights. No matter how fiercely Katakuri concentrated, he felt something tearing free from his chest, strand by strand. Inside the room, the slimy entity known as Hormuz contracted under Trafalgaro's command until it crystallized into a perfect, heart-shaped form. "Exchange!" Trafalgaro's eyes flared. He hurled the tiny heart into Katakuri's torso, and in that instant, Katakuri's soul shot out like a phantom arrow, streaking straight toward Nethan's body. Seizing the moment, Nethan lunged forward and drew his blade, Murai. With a single, razor-sharp strike through the very void, he impaled Katakuri's fleeing spirit. The soul collapsed into a writhing mass of strange energy that clung to Murai's blade before finally being drawn into the sword's hilt. In the sudden silence that followed, the dome of the room shimmered and dissipated, and Nethan stood victorious, Murai's dark core pulsing with the essence of his defeated foe. Nethan and Luo exchanged tense glances as they watched Katakuri lying unconscious on the chamber floor. Minutes felt like hours before Katakuri's eyelids fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented, then slowly arched his neck and flexed his arms as if testing himself. "Boss?" he murmured, his voice calm but puzzled, eyes locking onto Nethan. A wave of relief washed over Nethan. The soul fragment they'd harvested from the soul fruit had successfully overwritten Katakuri's original essence, completing the mind exchange. In that instant, Katakuri was no longer the fierce warrior they once knew, but a Hormuz bound to Nethan's will. Now came the crucial test. Could this new Hormuz channel even a fraction of Katakuri's former strength? Nethan braced himself, ready to find out. Chapter 364, Looted. A cold smile curved Nethan's lips as he stepped before Luo, blocking him from unlocking the seals. With 2 swift strokes of his Murame blade, he severed the seastone chains that bound the great Homi's construct, known as Katakuri. As each link shattered, a low rumble of power vibrated through the chamber, and Katakuri slowly rose to his feet. Though Katakuri's body was an echo of Nethan himself, an advanced Homi's prototype rather than the true Nethan, his strength and resolve were already impressive, approaching the level of a junior Nethan. He flexed a massive fist, feeling the torrent of energy surging through him, and spoke in a calm, almost detached tone. "I'm uncertain, but it doesn't feel beyond my control." Nethan raised an eyebrow in mild surprise. He had expected hesitation or instability. This confident assessment spoke of a stronger will than he'd predicted. Stroking his chin, he issued a single, crisp order. "Come with me." "Understood." Like the legendary Prometheus and Zeus forged by Big Mom, Katakuri's consciousness was simple, yet obedient by design. He followed Nethan down a maze of corridors until they reached a heavily fortified chamber deep within the base. The walls were sheathed in the strongest steel alloy, lined with a thick layer of sea stone and bolstered by shock absorption plating, every precaution taken to contain whatever trial lay ahead. Nethan stepped into the center of the room and turned to face his creation. He gave one curt nod. Without another word, he signaled for Katakuri to strike. In that reinforced vault, the true test of the Homi's prototype would begin. Even if this vault wasn't quite on par with Mary Gioia's core repository, it was close enough. It was designed to gauge the strength of every weapon that entered it. Crack! Holmes's eyes sparked with a calm intensity that mirrored Nethin's own. In an instant, his arm twisted and swelled, its flesh hardening into a massive iron mace. With ominous force, he swung it straight at Nethin. But Nethin didn't flinch. He simply raised his right arm, bracing for the blow. Boom! The mace slammed into Nethin's forearm with earth-shaking power, yet he held his ground without even staggering. "Keep going," Nethin said, his eyes glinting. At his signal, Holmes unleashed a storm of techniques, each one a perfect imitation of Katakuri's famed maneuvers. Bone-shaking impacts echoed through the vault. Boom! Boom! All the while, a faint smile tugged at Nethin's lips. He had underestimated his soul incarnation. Once that spirit took over Katakuri's body, it could channel up to 90% of the man's raw power. It lacked only the foresight ability, yet even without future sight, its strength was more than formidable. Holmes, after all, still ranked among the dreaded 3 disasters. And Nethin was enjoying every moment of the test. Trafalgaro stood in the doorway, watching Nethin and Katakuri clash. His eyes widened. He'd never imagined that Nethin's soul incarnation could channel Katakuri's power so flawlessly. As Katakuri unleashed another Holmes strike, Nethin countered with a distortion, charged fist. The impact detonated, shattering the attack into fragments like broken rice cakes and sending Katakuri tumbling backward. Nethin then lifted a hand in command. Without hesitation, the projection of Katakuri froze in midair. Nethin studied his foe. Katakuri no longer fit. This was a new incarnation, one born of his blade, Murasame. He couldn't summon infinite souls. Had he eaten the devil fruit himself, perhaps he could sustain 10 or more incarnations. As it was, Murasame's limit lay around 5 or 6, and that was more than enough. Now, with 6 souls at his disposal, and this new form wielding a superhuman-type wax fruit power, the perfect name came to him. 6 Paths of Asura, Hungry Ghost Path. It suited him down to the last detail. Nethin stood over the kneeling figure and spoke with absolute authority. "From this moment on, you will be called the evil ghost of Pain's 6 Paths. Remain here in the base, wear this cloak at all times, and under no circumstances let anyone become aware of your existence." He fastened a dark, hooded cloak around the spirit's shoulders. Though the evil ghost was indeed one of Nethin's soul incarnations, a kind of living puppet, it bore no real connection to the 6 Paths of Pain from Naruto. Their resemblance was only superficial, much like Big Mom's relationship with her living weapons, Prometheus and Zeus. But unlike Zeus, whose gluttony sometimes led him astray, Nethin's own soul shadows automatically inherited his self-restraint. He had no fear of this spirit falling into excess or rebellion. The evil ghost inclined its head in acknowledgement. It spoke in a measured, emotionless tone, devoid of Nethin's memories or deeper will, yet possessing a shard of his personality and a rudimentary consciousness. With the matter settled, Nethin and Luo made their way back to the laboratory. He had no intention of deploying his soul incarnations against foes weaker than Katakuri. After all, he could sustain at most 6 such creations at once. Nethin leaned in and spoke quietly to Luo. "Any puppet I bind must be at least as powerful as Katakuri, otherwise it isn't worth unleashing my soul incarnation. And once I've drawn out one soul incarnation, I can't produce a second right away. I'll need time to recover, or my willpower will sustain permanent damage. Keep the evil ghost Dao contained for now. Don't let him act unless it's absolutely necessary. And if he does make a move, you'll have to handle whatever fallout follows." Luo's expression turned grave as he absorbed Nethin's instructions and nodded firmly. If word ever leaked that Katakuri had fallen under Nethin's control, the other Yonko would feel threatened at once. Even if they didn't unite against the Ghost Hand pirates, they would be on high alert, and the world government and navy would be thrown into turmoil. Such a revelation could shake the very foundations of the world. After all, if Nethin succeeded in puppeteering 6 fighters of Katakuri's caliber, he could march straight on Navy headquarters and face no real opposition. The thought alone was enough to send shockwaves across every ocean. Nethin's ambitions extended far beyond simply recruiting fighters on Katakuri's level. His ultimate target was Kaido himself. Only by subjugating opponents of that caliber could he hope to amass the strength needed to stand against the world government. Back on the deserted island, Nathan allowed himself a long-rested recovery from mental exhaustion. As soon as he felt steady again, he planned to carve out another soul arsenal and feed it a genuine hurricane fruit. A soul arsenal born from a naturally grown hurricane fruit would far outstrip any created with mere storm fragments, perhaps even eclipsing the might of an evil ghost. The very idea electrified him. A few days later, the intelligence team returned with a dossier on the dreaded Black Prison and handed it to Robin. She hurried to brief Nathan on their findings. The prison's warden, Admiral Izai, had been a contemporary of Fleet Admiral Steele Gu Kong, and in all his years of service, no pirate ever managed to slip through his clutches. Every captured criminal was locked away in a pitch-dark dungeon so inescapable that Izai himself became known as the Black Prison Admiral. Even more astonishingly, several of the prisoners still held there had sailed during that same era. As Robin spoke, Nathan's eyes gleamed with interest. New opportunities were unfolding before him. Nathan leaned back in his chair, reviewing the scattered dossiers laid out before him. The history of the Marine admirals was more tangled than most realized. Just a few years ago, the top brass at Marine headquarters consisted of Admiral Sengoku and Admiral Zephyr, with one admiral's seat conspicuously empty. The world government had intended to promote Vice Admiral Karp into that vacancy, but each time the offer was made, Karp had politely yet firmly declined. Before Sengoku and Zephyr's tenure, the Admiralty had been fully fed Admiral Steelbone Kong, Admiral Black Prison, and a third officer so fearsome he was only ever referred to as the natural disaster. Then, in an abrupt reshuffle, Steelbone Kong was elevated to Fleet Admiral, and almost overnight, both Black Prison and the natural disaster resigned their commissions and vanished without a trace. Since that day, the world government has systematically suppressed any records of those two men. Their backgrounds, their missions, even the full extent of their powers, all of it has been expunged. Only scant rumors remain. Nathan, however, possessed one crucial advantage. He'd faced Black Prison in combat. From that battle, he'd learned the hard truth, that Black Prison's devil fruit granted him a supercharged form of gravity manipulation, far beyond anything seen in the current admirals. Even Fujitora, with his own gravity-based power, would struggle against an opponent whose fruit was a higher-grade variant. Nathan tapped his pen against the table. If word ever got out that Fujitora had tangled with this missing admiral, the fallout would be catastrophic. He couldn't let that happen, not while he still had questions to answer, and not until he knew exactly how deep the world government's secrets ran. Nathan frowned as he replayed the mission's aftermath in his mind. If he hadn't caused that uproar in the Holy Land and raided the core warehouse, he said quietly, this so-called Black Prison might never have been exposed. There's no doubt it's one of the world government's hidden fortresses. Robin leaned forward, her expression serious. There's more. A merchant vessel under our protection was attacked last night, and the assailant is one of the Shichibukai. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Crocodile got that bold? He gave Robin a skeptical glance. He's always been a loose cannon, but brazen enough to plunder our ship and threaten Whitebeard's head? That's new. Robin crossed her arms. Which of the 7 warlords do you think has the power to petrify an entire crew? She asked. Nathan considered for a moment, then shook his head. There's only one. Robin's lips curved into a grim smile. Boa Hancock. When the ship limped back to port, every crate was empty, and every sailor aboard had been turned to stone. Chapter 365. The Pirate Empress. Moonlight glinted off the deck rails of the Black Tide as Robin paused at the helm and fixed Nathan with a serious look. We need to talk about Empress Boa Hancock, he said quietly. Nathan's expression remained unreadable. He leaned against the rail, arms folded. The Empress, he repeated, voice calm. She's one of the most powerful figures in the New World. Facing her won't be easy. And if I'm not mistaken, Nine Snake Island lies dead center in the calm belt. Robin nodded. Exactly. A sea chart might guide us there, but it won't guarantee safe passage. In the calm belt, where the winds die and the waters grow eerily still, colossal sea kings roam freely. The supergiants and the giant sea kings alike are more than a match for any ordinary vessel. True, Nathan agreed. There are devil fruit users, like Rain's Shiryu, who can freeze the sea's surface, capable of fending off a few leviathans. But the calm belt is crawling with them. If one decides to swallow our ship whole, or smash it with a single swipe of its tail, we won't stand a chance. They fell silent as the waves slapped against the hull. Then Robin's eyes brightened. There is a way. Navy warships are inlaid with sea stones in their keels. The sea stones block the Sea King's ability to sense the ship, letting warships cross the calm belt unmolested. A slow smile spread across Nethin's face. So we replicate their method, embed sea stones in our hull. Robin returned the smile. Or better yet, capture one of their vessels and use theirs. Nethin tapped the rail, resolve sharpening his features. Either approach gives us a fighting chance. With a stealthy, sea stone-equipped ship, we can reach Nine Snake Island and confront the pirate empress on our own terms. Together, they turned their gaze to the horizon. Beyond the silent waters of the calm belt lay danger, challenge, and the legendary Boa Hancock herself. Nethin leaned back as Robin offered with a wry smile, "Leave this to Captain Shiryu. He'll be thrilled to take it on." Robin's grin grew broader. Facing a Shichibukai is nothing for the Ghost Hand pirates right now. We could dispatch any of our top squads and still have more than enough strength left over. Nethin imagined Captain Shiryu, nicknamed the Rain Runner, charging across the sea toward Nine Snake Island. He tapped his tongue against the roof of his mouth. Once Shiryu gets started, there's no stopping him, but if he makes off with marine warships, the Navy will be forced to respond. Robin cocked his head. "Then what do you suggest?" "I'll go," Nethin said calmly. "We can't ignore Nine Snake Island's power. If we handle this right, maybe they'll join us as our 9th team." Robin's half-smile turned into a teasing smirk. "Oh? So your real motive is to get a glimpse of the legendary pirate empress, eh?" Nethin feigned indifference. Inside, he chuckled. Empress Boa Hancock might be the most beautiful woman on the high seas, but so what? He was one of the 4 emperors of the New World, the strongest man alive. No mere empress would ever sway him. Nethin leaned back in his cabin's dim chart room, studying the rough lines on the parchment before him. "Given the Empress's deep hatred for the Tianlong people," he said, tapping the folded sea chart's creased margin, "it's entirely possible to bring Nine Snake Island under Wan Guo's banner as the 9th Division. The Empress herself would be more than capable of leading it." Robin glanced up, brow arched. "Shall I notify Her Majesty's court?" "No," Nethin replied, shaking his head. "Just hand me the chart." Robin produced the map with a smooth motion. Though the island's position was only approximate, it lay within a well-defined sea zone, more than enough for the Science Corps to zero in on. She offered him a small, confident smile. "We'll set sail at first light. Early departure, swift return, Captain." Nethin traced the island's jagged outline with his fingertip. After a heartbeat, he looked up. "I want you to come along," he said. "Legends speak of an ancient stone stele on Nine Snake Island, inscribed with priceless historical texts. I'd rather not leave that kind of discovery to chance." Robin's surprise flickered in her eyes for a moment. Then she nodded, her smile turning resolute. "Understood. I'll be ready." Nine Snake Island Royal Palace. Empress Hancock lounged on her chaise longue, freshly bathed and wrapped in a sumptuous silk robe. Droplets of water still clung to her dark hair as she gently smoothed the damp strands behind her ear. The soft afternoon light filtered through lattice windows, but the tranquil moment shattered when mother-in-law Ye swept in, her snake-carved cane tapping insistently against the marble floor. "I hear you seized a Chalfield family merchant ship." Ye's voice crackled with accusation. Once ruler of Nine Snake Island, the former empress's presence alone sent Hancock's maids scurrying in alarm, and even the 2 palace guards at the door froze in surprise. One trembling attendant managed, "Grandmother Yi, how did you—" "Silence!" Hancock's green eyes flashed as she looked up for the first time. Her tone remained cool. "Stop spreading rumors, or have me thrown out. I tire of this noise." Mother-in-law Ye let out a derisive laugh. "Hold on, Snake Princess. Do you even know who the Chalfields are? They're the financiers behind the Ghost Hand pirates." At her words, a heavy hush fell over the chamber. Empress Hancock's expression flickered, but it was the twin snake princesses, Sandersonia and Marigold, who truly betrayed their shock, exchanging stunned glances as they braced for what would come next. In these waters, almost no one has escaped the fame of the Four Emperors. If you haven't heard of them, you're an idiot. And as if that weren't enough, the Ghost Hand Pirates showed their might by defeating the Whitebeard Pirates not long ago, rising to become the single most feared force at sea. Their reputation echoes across every port. Sisters Sandersonia and Marigold exchanged knowing glances, transported back to the day they'd intercepted that Chalfield merchant vessel. No wonder its captain hadn't flinched. He'd calmly declared, "We serve the Chalfield family," and might have gone on if Hancock hadn't cut him off. In a heartbeat, she'd unleashed her power, turning every sailor aboard to stone. "Spare me the speeches," she'd snapped before her petrification wave swept through the hold. Though Sandersonia and Marigold recognized the Ghost Hand name, they never realized the Chalfields answered to those pirates. Once the entire crew lay frozen, they wasted no time. Marigold ordered her men aboard. Sandersonia directed them to haul the cargo, and in minutes they'd stripped the ship bare. Ghost Hand Pirates? From that day on, neither sister would ever doubt their legend again. Boa Hancock sat atop her ship, delicately smoothing her damp, silken hair with her ivory-white hands. For a moment, a subtle tension flickered in her otherwise untroubled gaze. Everyone who knew her understood her well. Prideful, vain, imperious, and by no means foolish. As in the original tale, the world government had dispatched its elite flying squirrel couriers to summon her to the Summit War. She knew all too well what would happen if she refused. Even without Luffy's involvement, her own presence on the battlefield would tip the scales dramatically in the Marines' favor. Months ago, she had quietly accepted the Treaty of Kiwuhai, swallowing her bitter resentment and deep hatred of both the world government and the celestial dragons. She'd done it for the sake of her people, an inconvenient compromise she'd long since learned to conceal behind a regal smile. "Yes," she murmured, recalling her mother's stern warning. "It's the Ghost Hand Pirates we're dealing with. You must never provoke them." "Snake Princess, you seized one of their merchantmen without hesitation. They won't forgive that affront. If they choose vengeance, they'll not stop until Kuja Island lies in ruins." Hancock's jade-tinted eyes narrowed. Let them come, she thought. Let them see what happens when they dare threaten the Snake Princess of Amazon Lily. Nethin's mother-in-law's words hit the room like a thunderclap. Sandersonia and Marigold exchanged alarmed glances, their faces paling as they turned toward Hancock. But Hancock only paused for a heartbeat, her slender fingers settling in her glossy black hair. With deliberate calm, she resumed brushing, then sighed in mild exasperation. "Ugh, this is such a nuisance. Just toss it out." Her mother-in-law went rigid, panic shining in her eyes. "Wait, Snake Princess!" she cried. "Someone, retrieve those items at once. There might still be a way to fix this. Otherwise—" She couldn't finish the warning, but the threat in her trembling voice was clear. Chapter 366, Arriving at Nine Snake Island. Hancock rose to her feet, her expression cold and unreadable as she fixed Granny Zay with a steely stare. "They've been raiding our merchant ships. So what?" she said dismissively. Then, almost imperceptibly, her icy features softened, and a trace of pity flickered in her eyes. "Honestly, I can forgive something like that." The ladies-in-waiting and female guards nearby felt their hearts flutter at the unexpected tenderness in the Empress's voice. None of them could remember the last time she showed mercy. Granny Z, rattled by the sudden warmth in Hancock's tone, snapped back to the present. She bared her teeth and spat. "Is this the time for softness? Princess, enough of your games!" Without another word, Hancock strode forward, her imperious bearing restored. She seized Granny Z by the hair, her face once again carved from ice. "I won't put up with your endless nagging," she declared in a voice as sharp as a blade. Granny Z let out a strangled cry as Hancock dragged her to the window and flung her out into the courtyard below. "Your Highness," the guards gasped, sweat beading on their brows. They exchanged horrified glances, realizing that no one, not even Granny Z, could stand against the wrath of the Snake Princess. Hancock turned her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks as she adopted a perfectly pouty expression. "If you're not careful," she teased in an almost pitiful tone. The female guards in the room squirmed. They knew they'd been caught off guard again. No one's perfect. Mistakes happen. Once Granny Z had been unceremoniously tossed out, Hancock slumped back onto the couch and spoke with cool authority. "Everyone, out. Sanda, Mary, both of you too." The guards bowed and filed out. Sandersonia and Marigold exchanged tense glances, but, powerless in the moment, followed them. There was no undoing what had happened. Boarding and looting a merchant ship was piracy, plain and simple. Some of the cargo had already been consumed, and even an intact shipment wouldn't erase the offense. They knew Hancock's ruthless reputation. She would never forgive or forget. Still, as they stepped onto the docks of Nine Snake Island, nestled within the windless zone, where even the slightest breeze was a miracle and colossal sea kings prowled beneath the waves, they couldn't help but feel a measure of relief. At least here, they weren't alone in fearing the ocean's worst. With Jew Snake Island's natural defenses, the ghost hand pirates don't stand a chance. Once the guards and her two younger sisters had left, Hancock found herself alone in the spacious chamber. She sighed softly, sank down on the couch, and drew her slender legs close, folding her smooth, alabaster arms around them. Clad only in a white silk bathrobe, she lowered her head. The soft curves of her shoulders, the flawless sheen of her skin, and the hint of sorrow creasing her brows were all visible to anyone who happened to enter at that moment. Her beauty was transcendent. Few could resist it. Yet beneath Hancock's regal confidence and the faint trace of arrogance lay a keen, calculating mind. Ever since she learned days ago that the merchant ship's attackers were led by the ghost hand pirates, she'd understood just how serious the situation was. But resolving it wouldn't be as simple as her mother had insisted. Chiwuhai is territory the world government claims exclusively. Confronting the four emperors over it means the Navy and government forces won't come to her aid. And trying to retrieve the stolen goods herself? Equally unthinkable. Hancock closed her eyes. Cornered between impossible choices, she felt the weight of her responsibilities settle like a stone in her chest. The storm was coming, and she had to be ready. She refused to bow, even if it cost her life. No matter the price, she would never return the stolen treasures or prostrate herself before anyone. Without that unyielding pride, she could never have worn such a proud, imperious expression in the first place. Hancock's slender fingers dug into the flesh of her calf, leaving faint dents in her skin. She bared her silver teeth, but the flash of metal spoke not of fierce resolve, but of a deeper fragility. For all her arrogance and iron will, there lay at her core an unhealed wound, the secret shame of her former life as a slave. It was this unspoken vulnerability that kept her power chained to a single level, strong enough to threaten a minor isle like Nine Snakes, yet far from matching Doflamingo's dominance. Seated alone, her carefully constructed facade faltered, and every hidden fear began to surface. Before she could force them back into the shadows, a voice burst through the door, trembling with alarm. "Nethin, Princess Snake, enemies are approaching." Hancock had been clutching her calf and grinding her silver teeth a moment before. Then, with a single deep breath, her tension melted away and she reclaimed her regal bearing as pirate queen. Swiftly, she gathered her robe around her, stepped down from the dais, and headed for the doorway. She paused when she spotted a guard posted there, his face ashen, posture rigid. "What's the matter?" she demanded. The guard's voice quavered. I'm afraid it's the ghost hand pirates." Hancock's eyes narrowed. "You're trembling like a leaf? Pathetic. Get out of my sight." With a dismissive wave, she swept past him and stalked toward the palace gates. Instead of cowering, the guard's features hardened. Clenching his weapon, he followed her without a word. On Hydra Island's coast, a single ghost hand pirate's ship, its black and red flag snapping in the wind, was making fast to the dock. Along the shore of Nine Snake Island, a fierce battle raged. Scores of island defenders had already landed, and more reinforcements were pouring in. Yet from the invading vessel, only two figures had disembarked, silent and deadly as shadows against the rising sun. Nithin and Robin faced down wave after wave of assailants from Nine Snake Island without so much as a flinch. Nithin himself didn't lift a finger. He stood impassively with his hands clasped behind his back, while Robin single-handedly cut a swath through the attackers. They came at her in droves, but she dispatched each one effortlessly, her movements precise and devastating. Not a single swordsman from Nine Snake Island managed to land a blow. Lately, Robin's strength has stalled. She's been stuck at this level for months, and she's shown no interest in pushing past her bottleneck. No one can force her to train harder if she doesn't want to, least of all Nethan. He's fully satisfied with her current fighting prowess. After all, Robin isn't the kind of warrior who rushes headlong into slaughter. She fights precisely and decisively, doing just enough to get the job done. Still, there's no denying that many of these Nine Snake Island fighters are more powerful than she is. In their world, combat is the only path to growth, and Robin's only real battles have been alongside Nethan over the past 7 years. Together, they've clawed their way from obscurity to infamy. Robin has proven herself countless times, earning her spot among the 4 emperors, pirate crew, and comfortably matching her 400 million berry bounty. Watching her dismantle their foes with cool efficiency, Nethan allowed himself the faintest of smiles. Her strength, even if capped for now, was more than enough. And so, with Robin guarding his flank, he had no doubts about the confrontation ahead. No doubts at all. Although it wasn't quite on the same level as Doflamingo and the 3 Plague Generals, this power still ranked only 1 tier below them, and it was undeniably formidable. With a flick of her wrist, Robin summoned a cascade of 30 blossoming flowers. Guzao! Dozens of Nine Snake Island's female warriors surged forward in relentless waves. Robin remained perfectly calm, folding her arms as she watched them advance. Then, with a deliberate twist and a series of brittle cracks, dozens of extra limbs sprouted from her body, each one snapping into place like living steel. Yet Robin did not strike them down. She held back, for Nethan's orders were clear. He had no intention of destroying Nine Snake Island. His true goal was far subtler and far more strategic. Tonight, the Ghost Hand Pirates would claim this island as their own. Chapter 367, Robin and Hancock. Stand back! Robin's calm warning came just after she had cut down one Hydra warrior after another. The beach was strewn with fallen female fighters from the pirate crew known as Hydra, their colorful uniforms stained with sand and blood. Just as Robin prepared to finish the last enemy, 2 new figures stormed into the fray. Boa Sandersonia and Boa Marigold, the younger sisters of the pirate Empress Hancock. At first, they had planned to avoid a direct conflict with the Ghost Hand Pirates. But when they saw their comrades dropping to the ground beneath Robin's precise strikes, they could hold back no longer. With a fierce roar, Sandersonia and Marigold lunged forward in unison. "Dazzling 100 Blossoms, clone!" Sandersonia shouted, releasing a flurry of glowing flower petals that swirled around her. In an instant, dozens of ethereal clones bloomed across the sand. Robin's expression didn't change. She folded her arms over her chest and watched the petals dance. As they scattered, 2 perfect duplicates of herself emerged, stepping into line beside the real Robin. The trio advanced in sync toward the charging sisters. Sandersonia and Marigold braced themselves, their shock at facing Robin's clones evident on their faces. But there was no hesitation. They raised their weapons high and slashed downward in a vicious arc. Clang! On Robin's slender alabaster arms, a jet-black haze of armament hockey flared to life. The real Robin and her 2 copies crossed their arms in a single fluid motion, intercepting the sisters' blows with an unbreakable barrier of hockey. The impact vibrated the air, but did not budge the 3 Robins an inch. Sandersonia's eyes narrowed. Marigold let out a low whistle. "Her hockey, it's on another level," Sandersonia murmured to her sister. Indeed, the sheen of armament hockey running along Robin's arms was stronger and darker than anything they had ever encountered. From the power of that single block, it was clear Robin's mastery of hockey far surpassed their own. A tense silence fell, broken only by the cries of wounded Hydra warriors behind them. The 2 sisters exchanged a determined look, and with synchronized ease they shifted their weapons to resume the assault. But Robin simply smiled, and the real battle for the coast had only just begun. On this island of the 9 snakes, only Sister Hancock's armament hockey stands a chance against the opponent before me. Even so, Sandersonia and Marigold know they're outmatched. They've already felt the force of Robin's power. But there's no turning back. Gritting their teeth, they launch fresh strikes. Robin's lips curl into a faint smile. With a subtle gesture, she seizes control of their weapons mid-swing, binding Sandersonia and Marigold's arms in an unbreakable grip. She twists with effortless precision, snap, and their blades shatter. Before either woman can recover, Robin sweeps her arms upward. Countless spectral limbs surge together, coalescing into two colossal slaps that slam Sandersonia and Marigold flying across the clearing. A hush falls over the scattered fighters of Nine Snake Island. They watch, hearts pounding, as their two strongest champions lie defeated. If even Sandersonia and Marigold are helpless against this woman, what hope do they have? A cold wave of fear ripples through them all. The most frightening presence in that moment wasn't the woman who just knocked them aside. It was the man calmly standing on the shore, hands clasped behind his back. Few of the Ghost Hand pirates knew Nico Robin by name, but word of Nethan of the Four Emperors had spread even to the remote shores of Nine Snake Island. Despite their isolation, these islands' inhabitants still ventured out to raid shipping lanes and occasionally caught glimpses of world newspapers or bounty posters. Everyone had heard of the fearsome pirate lord who reigned at the very pinnacle of the New World. Sandersonia and Marigold lay on the sand, each tasting coppery blood at the corner of her mouth. They met eyes and saw the same disbelief reflected there. They'd known that daring to provoke the Ghost Hand pirates would have consequences, but they never expected to be summoned so swiftly. Worse yet, the captain himself hadn't even lifted a finger. It had been the woman at his side who'd mercilessly dismantled them. The Four Emperors truly were beyond terrifying. Rumor now whispered that even a warrior's stronghold like Nine Snake Island stood little chance against such power. As the Nine Snake Island warriors paused, uncertain whether to renew their attack, Robin came to a halt and offered a crooked smile. From the shoreline, Nethan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes locked on her every move. He had never before seen Robin dispatch their foes with such effortless precision, enough to make even the bravest hesitate. Though kind at heart, Robin cloaked herself in a mischievous cynicism and razor-sharp wit. It was precisely her intelligence, her uncanny instinct for knowing exactly what to do in any situation, that made Nethan unwilling to let her out of his sight. Her occasional pranks, meant to voice a playful complaint, never managed to truly rile him. And whenever he found himself in need, Robin was always the first to perceive it. Few people in the world possessed such a gift, not even Khalifa or Reiju, formidable as they were. Robin's teasing words carried across the field, and a ripple of annoyance swept through the island's female warriors. Several of them clenched their teeth, bristling at her mockery, even as they dared not step forward. Stimulated by Robin's challenge, a handful of hot-headed fighters swallowed their fear and charged. Boom! Boom! Robin's face remained serene, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips as each would-be assailant flew backward. She wasn't known for close-quarters brawling, but as Nethan's closest ally, she moved with astonishing lightness and precision. From the sidelines, Nethan watched with a satisfied grin. There was a peculiar thrill in seeing Robin dispatch opponents so effortlessly. One by one, bodies collapsed at her feet, until a new challenger emerged from the throng. She wore a scarlet cheongsam that hugged her elegant figure, 9 snake-shaped earrings glinting against her delicate lobes. Her long black hair fluttered around her like liquid silk, and even her footsteps seemed almost weightless. Boom! In a single, flawless motion, she unleashed a high-powered kick infused with the sweet, sweet fruit's energy. One of Robin's clones exploded into a cascade of pink petals that fluttered to the ground. Robin paused mid-stride, her calm smile vanishing. She turned her head, eyes narrowing as she fixed her gaze on this unexpected newcomer. Nethan didn't need an introduction. One look at the woman before him, and he knew he stood face to face with the pirate empress herself, the legendary Boa Hancock, feared by every bold soul and worshipped by those too timid to cross her. Even with his enhanced sight, he couldn't deny the regal air she carried, every inch the empress of the seas. She hovered where she'd paused after dispatching one of his clones, eyeing him coolly instead of finishing him off. "Tell me," she said with a contemptuous tilt of her chin, "are you with the Ghost Hand pirates?" Nethan studied her for a moment before offering a wry smile. "Division 6's captain, Boa Hancock. You attacked the Chowfield merchant convoy. Don't pretend you had no motive." Her lips curved into a faint, arrogant smile as she lifted a slim hand in a graceful arc. "I confess I was captivated by their cargo," she replied lightly. "So I brought it here. What's the harm in that?" She let the question hang in the air, daring him to disagree. Nethin watched from the shoreline as Boa Hancock addressed Nico Robin aboard her ship. At first, Hancock's words were polite and measured, but in the second half of her sentence, she quietly unleashed the power of her love fruit. Her voice turned honeyed and irresistible, rippling with a charisma so potent that even Nethin, standing yards away on solid ground, felt his thoughts falter. Robin's cheeks flushed a faint rose. She nearly bowed in concession, yet caught herself at the last moment, hardening her expression as a heat swelled in her chest. Nethin recalled warning her earlier. Hancock's natural beauty was legendary, and with the devil fruit's power added to her allure, she could ensnare any man, woman, or child. At the time, Robin had laughed him off. Now, watching her struggle to maintain her composure, Nethin understood just how true his words had been, and a slight ache throbbed at Robin's temples. Before Robin could answer, Hancock spoke again, each syllable drenched in soft, pleading charm. "Those goods are extremely important to this king. Will you seriously abandon your pursuit?" Even Robin, calm, calculating Robin, found the question tugging at her resolve. The air between them seemed to tighten, and Nethin braced himself, knowing that breaking free of Hancock's enchantment would take everything Robin had left. Hancock's greatest strength lies in the irresistible force of her charm, amplified by her imperious presence. Together, they create a sweeping effect. Anyone whose will or physical power falls below a certain threshold simply can't resist her, and even those stronger than that find themselves unable to fight at full strength. After all, a Marine lieutenant general once drove a dagger into his own heart just to break free of her sway. Imagine it on the battlefield, Hancock standing atop the harbor walls, activating her love fruit power, and batting her lashes as she coos, "Won't you please stop fighting? I'm just too scared." In an instant, the entire fleet would be rendered utterly helpless, hearts and swords swept away. Chapter 368. Attitude toward Nethin. Robin drew in a steadying breath, tamping down the turmoil roiling inside her. "We don't intend to hunt you down," she said evenly. "All we require is that you renounce your title as one of the king's warlords and bring Nine Snake Island into our fold. Your people will be treated as our own. There will be no further pursuit." Hearing the demand to abandon her warlord rank and surrender Amazon Lily, Hancock's pride flared instantly. She treasured that title above all else and bristled at the notion of taking orders from anyone. With a casual flick of her wrist, the pirate ship anchored nearby shuddered, and every crewman aboard was frozen solid, turned to living stone. "Do you really think I'd submit so easily?" Hancock's voice was light, almost teasing, but each word carried the hidden sting of her love fruit power. Her beauty itself was a weapon. Robin's gaze hardened to ice. "If you refuse," she warned, "you'd best not blame the king for what comes next." Hancock lifted her chin, and in an instant her form blurred into an afterimage as she surged toward Robin on a breeze scented like spring flowers. Her long legs carved a perfect arc through the air, her flawless skin gleaming with every movement. Though Robin braced himself, he couldn't help but falter at the sight of her beauty. That momentary hesitation cost him. Boom! Robin's defenses sparked as Hancock's horizontal kick drove him backward. But she didn't let up. Channeling her momentum, she followed up with a rapid flurry of side kicks. Each swing of her Cheongsamhem revealed tantalizing glimpses of her lithe silhouette, and each strike sent another shockwave through Robin's guard. Boom! 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 Under the onslaught of Hancock's charm-imbued assault, Robin found himself pushed onto the back foot. He raised his arms in a tight guard, deflecting blow after blow, but the pressure was relentless. At last, he sprang back, folding his arms protectively across his chest, ready, at last, to unleash his power. He never got the chance. In that instant, Hancock's eyes gleamed with sweeping arrogance. A predator sensing weakness, she lunged forward once more, determined to finish what she had started. Nethin watched in disbelief as Hancock's marrow no me power sapped Robin's strength. No sooner had Robin struggled to regain her footing than Hancock followed up with a crushing surge of Conqueror's haki. Under the combined weight of love-based petrification and that irresistible kingly aura, Robin found her Hana Hana no Mi ability failing. She couldn't even sprout a single extra limb. In pure physical prowess and mastery of armament hockey, Robin had always been nearly Hancock's equal. After all, she'd traveled alongside Nethan for years and witnessed countless demonstrations of overwhelming will. But the heady blend of Hancock's deadly charm, that searing glare, and her undeniable presence opened a yawning gap between them. Boom! Before Robin could react, Hancock's sidekick slammed into her ribs, sending her skidding across the deck. Robin had just enough time to harden her arm with Busoshoku haki, yet she felt the reinforced lining threaten to crack under the impact. If Hancock struck that layer again, it would turn to stone and shatter instantly, with catastrophic results. Gasping for breath, Robin realized how hopelessly outmatched she was. Swallowing her pride, she let out a resigned sigh. There was simply no beating Hancock at her own game. Back when she'd been talking with Nethan before arriving, he'd teased her with a smirk. Why not challenge the Empress? See if her so-called charm really works. And sure enough, Robin had let down her guard. Hancock's beauty and regal bearing did distract her, just as Nethan predicted. The realization stung, and Robin's irritation flared. Boom! In the next instant, Hancock sprang off Robin's shoulder, twisting in midair to drive a foot straight into Robin's chest. The Empress meant to finish her in one brutal strike. But then the earth itself seemed to revolt. The ground heaved wildly. An enormous slab of earth shot upward like a volcanic tongue. Everyone staggered as the world shuddered beneath their feet. Crash! Hancock's boot slammed into the upturned boulder, smashing it to fragments. Yet when the dust settled, Robin was already 20 feet back, out of harm's way. She crouched, her heart pounding, but her spirit unbroken. Robin's gaze flicked to the shoreline. There, standing perfectly still with his hands clasped behind his back, was Nethan, calm, composed, and oddly amused as he watched the duel unfold. She'd been so absorbed in fighting Hancock's subordinates that she'd hardly noticed him. Only now, witnessing the tremor and that effortless stance on the beach, did she realize Nethan had been there the entire time. The attack just now was clearly not Robin's doing. The knowledge-based perception she'd unleashed was nothing more than an extension of Nethan's power from the shore. Defeating Robin so decisively only confirmed the rumors about him. He truly was strong enough to command the 9th Division of the world government's forces. "What do you think?" Nethan asked, his voice steady as he stepped forward. He emitted no overt aura, no domineering presence, but with each step he took, the air in the clearing grew palpably heavier. Even Hancock, who rarely showed emotion, wore a look of genuine respect. Stripped of rank and title, to her he was simply an undeniably powerful man. "You're Nethan," Hancock said, meeting his eyes at last. Her tone carried none of her usual scorn, only curiosity and something almost like admiration. For a moment, Nethan wondered when his own presence had begun to affect her so. Before he could dwell on it, a figure glided forward from behind Hancock, serpent staff in hand. It was Queen Sandersonia, Hancock's mother, her gaze as cool and unflinching as ever. "If you pledge yourself to the Ghost Hand Pirates," she intoned, "your rank within the world government means nothing here. Rest assured, neither the Marines nor the government will make a rash move on Snake Island." With that, the tension in the clearing eased, at least for now, as all eyes turned once again to Nethan. Nethan stood there, barely a year younger than Hancock, and Granny Jay couldn't help but let out a silent sigh. In her eyes, Hancock was already the once-in-a-century Empress of Amazon Lily, yet Nethan's brilliance somehow outshone even hers. At such a young age, he'd risen to the rank of one of the 4 emperors of the sea, and in doing so had unseated Whitebeard as the world's strongest pirate. In raw talent and sheer power, no one dazzled the world more than he did. Granny Jay understood why Hancock regarded him so differently. Rumors had spread that Nethan had slain celestial dragons more than once, causing uproar across the seas, even reaching the shores of Amazon Lily. When Hancock first read the dispatches, she'd been stunned. Only later did she grasp the full truth. One of the dragons Nethan killed was the very noble who had forced her to eat the love fruit, condemning her to a life of isolation and pain. To this day, Hancock's heart held genuine gratitude for only 2 people. Tiger the Murloc, who rescued her from the Sea of Misery, and Nethin, who had liberated her by slaying her original oppressor. Standing before him now, she said nothing, but her eyes spoke volumes. Beneath her calm exterior, her heart was in turmoil. She felt drawn to Nethin and repelled by him at the same time. On one hand, she burned with glee at the thought of accusing him for killing that Tianlong clansman. Yet the moment she stood before him, all her certainty evaporated. Was he her savior or her executioner? She didn't know whether to hate him or to thank him. Chapter 369, Twisted Mind. This king had no intention of playing puppet. At last, Empress Hancock spoke, her voice slow and deliberate. No matter what her personal feelings were toward Nethin, she refused to show even the slightest hint of submission. Proud as she was, she would never bow before another. Her title, Marquise of Chiwuhai under the king, meant nothing more than a political alliance. As captain of the 9th Division, she remained fully loyal to the Ghost Hand pirates. Each word she chose was laced with her famed, intoxicating charm. For a moment, Nethin felt as if he might cave in and say, "Fine, do as you wish." But his willpower was among the strongest in the world. He met her gaze without wavering, though he couldn't deny the subtle tug of her presence. He admired Hancock's beauty, but he refused to be controlled by it. Silently, Nethin slid his fingers to rest on Muramaro's waist. He summoned the Soul Fruit's power and fused it with his distortion ability. The two forces surged through him, instantly quelling every trace of distraction and restoring his unbreakable focus. Nethin let his gaze settle on Hancock, his expression as still and unrateable as a calm sea. Behind him, Lafitte watched in silence, but this moment belonged entirely to him and the power he'd just unlocked. He had spent weeks fusing the principles of hypnotism with the distortion fruit's power and the soul fruit's energy, ultimately creating what he called the distorted mind. With it, he could twist a person's emotions, drowning them in despair, drowning out their fear, or driving them to unending rage. So far, however, he'd only had the courage to test it on himself, and even then, his control was far from perfect. Now, Nethin stepped forward. He rested his forefinger lightly on the hilt of Murasame, the blade's cold steel a silent promise of what lay behind his calm words. "You have exactly two choices," he said, voice even. "You can join me of your own free will, or I will make you." Hancock's stormy eyes narrowed. Once a slave of the celestial dragons, now the pirate empress, she despised being compelled above all else. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. In her silence, Nethin sensed both her fury and her pride, each one a potential weapon, and an invitation to test the true limits of his new ability. Queen Mother's voice trembled with urgency as she stood beside her daughter. "Hancock, what are you waiting for? Don't you recognize who stands before you? This is one of the 4 emperors, the man they call Ghost Hand Nethin, the one who helped bring down Whitebeard himself. He's here on 9 Snake Island in person. If he means to strike, our home will be lost forever." But her warning only hardened Hancock's resolve. Straightening her spine, she swept her cloak aside and met Nethin's calm gaze. "Enough," she snapped. "I am the Empress of Amazon Lily. No one, least of all you, tells me what to do." Nethin watched her without a hint of surprise or intimidation. Her beauty was legendary, her strength formidable, and her pride unmistakable. He had no intention of being beguiled by royal heirs alone, yet he recognized a warrior's spirit when he saw one. He took a deliberate step forward, folding his arms. "Empress Hancock," he began, his voice as steady as iron, "I respect your courage and your authority here. That is precisely why I offer you a choice." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "Ally yourself with me, swear fealty, and I will guarantee Amazon Lily's safety, and grant you a place of honor in my new world order. Refuse, and I promise you no quarter. Like any who resist me, this island will fall." Hancock drew in a slow breath. Her eyes flashed with defiance. Queen Mother clutched her daughter's arm, anxious for an answer. But Hancock only lifted her chin higher, ready to meet the 4 emperors' ultimatum head-on. Nethin advanced without a word, his expression calm. Boa Hancock watched him with a frigid smile. "What good is power if you won't obey orders? No king bows to anyone," she declared, her voice ice-cold. "Then try to stop me," Nethin replied evenly. With that, he took a single step forward, and in the next instant he was upon her. A whispered warning ran through the Hydra Island guards as they braced themselves and unleashed their haki. But even their combined willpower could not slow him. Hancock's eyes snapped open just in time to see him strike, and she instinctively countered with her own armament haki. The collision echoed like thunder. With one devastating blow, Hancock was sent flying backward, tumbling across the deck. "Princess Snake!" The shout rose in a single horrified surge as everyone on the island, soldiers and attendants alike, staggered back in shock. Marina and Sandersonia hurtled forward in unison, their faces a mask of fury and fear. No matter who he is, even if he's one of the four emperors, no one lays a hand on Sister Hancock. But as they closed the distance, they realized this was only the beginning. Nethin never intended to lay a hand on Marigold or the others, nor did they ever imagine he would. Yet, beneath the guise of an ordinary man, a dreadful power suddenly stirred. His black cloak snapped upward as if caught in a violent gust, and in that instant the world fell silent. The oppressive aura radiating from him eclipsed even Hancock's supreme presence. It rippled outward like a tidal wave, sweeping across the clearing with irresistible force. Dozens of Nine Snake Island's female warriors froze mid-step, as if their bodies had been severed like sheaves of grain, then toppled in silent heaps. Even the captain of the guards, hardened to Hancock's own domineering stare, staggered, eyes rolling, before collapsing one after another. Only Marigold and Sandersonia, Hancock's most loyal lieutenants, clung to consciousness. Their bodies shook, sweat running in rivulets down their faces, but they forced themselves to stay on their feet, gripping their weapons until their knuckles whitened. In Nethin's gaze, they saw something far beyond power. Utter astonishment and raw, instinctive fear. Nethin's mere presence stole the will to fight from everyone nearby. No one could even lift a finger. This was the fearsome ghost hand Nethin, one of the four emperors. Farther off, the Snake Princess Hancock, still reeling from Nethin's last strike, executed a perfect aerial flip and landed on her feet. But before she could recover, Nethin's oppressive aura closed in again. Deep within her, a proud, unyielding power flared to life, colliding with his in midair. For a moment, their shared intensity dimmed the very sky. Only Granny Z remained on her feet, though barely. Propped against her serpent staff, she groaned as each creak of bone echoed under Nethin's relentless glare. "Your Highness, Snake Princess," she rasped, voice trembling. As Nethin's informant, she'd long known that no force in this world, Hancock included, could truly rival his strength. Resistance seemed unthinkable, yet Hancock did not waver. Though Nethin's aura dwarfed her own, she stood firm, crimson eyes blazing with defiance. The world held its breath as two sovereign wills clashed in the hush that followed. Chapter 370. The Slightly Tsundere Empress. A howling gale whipped through the clearing, centering itself on the two figures locked in silent combat. Nethin stood motionless, his calm, unblinking gaze fixed on Empress Hancock. In that instant, even her formidable resolve wavered. An unmistakable glimmer of emotion flickered in her eyes. Step by measured step, Nethin advanced. The wind seemed to bend around him, the very air trembling at his approach. Hancock braced herself, determined not to show any sign of weakness. Yet with each footfall, Nethin's presence pressed in on her, as though he were a force of nature rather than a man. Finally, the pressure became too much. Hancock's chest tightened, and she let out a sharp cry. "Captive arrow!" A soft peach-pink heart blossomed on her bosom. With a graceful flick of her jade-white finger, the heart twanged like a bowstring, unleashing a volley of rose-tinted arrows that streaked toward Nethin. He responded with a single, effortless motion, his dark cloak sweeping outward in a wide arc. The arrows shattered in midair, scattering like petals on a gust of wind. "Armed color," Hancock whispered, her pupils narrowing in astonishment. There was no doubt in her mind. Nethin had activated armament haki of the highest order, and with it he had effortlessly dispelled her captive arrow technique. His mastery of haki was leagues beyond her own. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Nethin's cloak settled, and he continued forward, expression serene. Facing him, the slightly tsundere Empress felt her heart quicken, both from the sting of defeat and from a curiously thrilling spark she could not deny. Nethin felt a yawning gulf between himself and Hancock's power, just as vast as when she first confronted the former emperor of Nine Snake Island with her supreme armament haki. This time, however, he stood firm, forcing her to admit silently that she wouldn't break his resolve so easily. A bead of sweat slid down Hancock's brow as she clenched her silver-white teeth. She refused to believe her legendary charms could fail her now. Gathering every ounce of her sweet devil fruit ability, she summoned a gentle, perfumed breeze and threw her arms wide. Her fingers curved into a perfect heart, the prelude to her ultimate skill. Anyone ensnared by its pink glow, unless safeguarded by full-body armament haki, would instantly turn to stone. Nethan didn't flinch. He advanced steadily, stepping right into her invisible trap. The rosy aura swirled around him, brushing and rippling over his clothes, and yet he felt nothing. No stiffness, no paralysis. The light faded as if it had met an impassable barrier. Hancock's eyes widened in shock. Since consuming the sweet devil fruit and escaping the sanctified halls of Mary Joa, her charm had only grown more potent. And yet here was a man utterly unaffected by it. For the first time, her confidence wavered. No one had ever completely ignored Hancock's charms, not men nor women. Yet before her now stood Nethan, utterly unmoved. He wasn't raising a blade against her, nor was he retreating in fear. He simply looked right through her, as if her famed beauty didn't exist. For the first time, Hancock felt a jolt of true disbelief. Her love fruit powers had failed. There was not even a flicker of attraction in his eyes. It was one thing to lose a duel. It was quite another to have your very presence nullified. Nethan strode forward, his face impassive. He couldn't, explain that he'd activated his unique ability to suppress all feelings of attraction, rendering himself temporarily immune to her wiles. As he closed the distance, Hancock's confidence wavered, and a rare, cold panic crept into her heart. Her legendary hold over others was slipping away, and this unforeseen vulnerability shattered her composure. Sensing her inner turmoil, Nethan halted. In that instant of perfect stillness, a sharp metallic ring cut through the air. With deliberate calm, he drew his sword, Murasame, its polished edge gleaming under the lantern light. Then invoked the power of distortion and unleashed his soul fruit ability. The two forces converged at the edge of his sword, bathing the blade in an otherworldly glow. Swirling tendrils of light twisted and shimmered as Nethan calmly intoned the incantation. Then, with unnerving speed, he lunged, his sword driving forward before Hancock even had time to register the attack. "Snake Princess! Sister!" Grandma Z and Sandersonia shouted in unison, their voices cracking with terror. Hancock froze, eyes wide, as she stared at the sword hilt plunging through her chest. Strangely, there was no pain, no crimson spray, no gasp for breath. It was as if Nethan's blade had sliced straight into her soul rather than her flesh. In that instant, Hancock's mind erupted into chaos. Nethan's distortion magic flooded her thoughts, wresting control away. This was the first time he'd ever targeted another mind with his power, and as the swirling energy subsided around him, he hesitated, uncertain which path to warp her psyche. A heartbeat passed in tense silence. Then Nethan released the spell, the warped light dissipating. With a single, steady motion, he withdrew his sword from Hancock's chest, leaving everyone, herself included, in stunned, breathless shock. Nethan drew the blade from Hancock's chest, and to her astonishment, there wasn't so much as a scratch on her skin or tear in her gown. It was as if the sword had never truly pierced her at all. He held the cold steel to her throat once more. "Well, then, what will you do now?" he asked, his voice calm as the strange distortion in the air faded away, and Hancock blinked back to full awareness. This was Nethan's first time using his mind-twisting power, so he'd restrained himself. He'd merely swept away the outer layers of Hancock's vanity and willfulness, nothing more. He had no idea what the consequences might be. Feeling the chill of the blade against her white neck, Hancock betrayed not a flicker of fear. Instead, she clenched her jaw, her emerald eyes narrowing. At last she whispered, "A ruler must consider her choices carefully." Her pride bristled at the thought of yielding, yet she knew in her heart she would never sacrifice the people of Amazon Lily to save herself. Worse still, Nethan's utter indifference to her famed beauty and influence had shaken her more profoundly than she cared to admit. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then the hard edge of Nethan's gaze softened, and the domineering gleam in his eyes receded like the tide. Nethan slid his blade from Hancock's throat, returned it to its scabbard, and regarded her with silent curiosity. He couldn't read minds, but his formidable intellect and no small amount of arrogance let him sense the turmoil in her heart. More than that, he was fascinated by his own power to twist another's psyche. Under his steady gaze, Hancock's cheeks flushed pink. She looked away and snapped, "Stop staring at me like that. It's disrespectful." A hint of amusement flickered in Nethin's eyes. Pride, was it? He leaned forward, intrigued by how she bristled under his scrutiny. His distortion gift couldn't erase a person's true nature. At best, it could amplify, dampen, or bend their dominant traits. In Hancock's case, he had tempered her reckless vanity and boundless will into the calm, poised authority of an empress, complete with a touch of mild arrogance. And now, watching her defy him so fiercely, he realized the transformation had made her all the more compelling. Chapter 371. The World Trembles. Several days later, deep in a hidden cavern behind the mountains of Nine Snake Island, Nethin made an astonishing discovery: an ancient historical stele. Ordinarily, this cave would have been pitch black, but Nethin bent the faint light seeping through the entrance until the entire chamber shone like midday. He'd brought Robin here on a hunch. He'd never seen any record of such a monument in the island's archives, and yet something told him it existed. Robin approached the monolithic stone and began tracing the weathered characters with his fingertips. The inscription wasn't an arcane intellect record or one of the fabled road sign histories. It was a straightforward chronicle of Nine Snake Island's past. Even so, its value was beyond measure. Robin read each line aloud, his voice steady as he deciphered the stories etched into the rock. Beyond unearthing this stele, another major shift had taken place in the last few days. Hancock had at last chosen to bring Nine Snake Island under the banner of the 10,000 flags. The balance of power in these waters was about to change, and with it, the world would tremble. Nethin surveyed the map one last time. On paper, Fishman Island and the Kingdom of Dressrosa remained affiliated with the world government, but in reality, both lay firmly beneath the banner of the Ghost Hand Pirates, listed among their so-called 10,000 flags. He'd toyed with the idea of assigning Boa Hancock directly to the 10,000 Flags network, but ultimately decided to station her on Kuja Island, the Isle of the Nine Serpents, where her presence would cause the least political friction. Exactly 2 weeks later, the world was set ablaze by the headlines. The pirate empress, one of the Shichibukai, had officially renounced her commission with the world government and pledged herself to the Ghost Hand Pirates. Such a stunning volte-face shook every power broker from Marijoy to the New World. No one had anticipated that the lone empress, sovereign of the Kuja tribe, would bow to another's influence. Yet Ghost Hand Nethin, perched atop the greatest power any pirate could wield, possessed both the means and the right to claim even the proudest warlord. As news of Hancock's defection swept across the seas, countless admirers and would-be suitors let out a collective sigh. Any fanciful hopes of winning her hand, or her favor, vanished in an instant. With this dramatic turn, Nethin had now engineered the downfall or defection of 4 Shichibukai, and the world had only just begun to feel the weight of his ambition. In addition to the disasters Crocodile, Moonlight Moria, and Doflamingo have brought down on us, the Pirate Queen's betrayal was the last straw. What enrages the world government most is that she wasn't defeated by Nethin, but instead renounced her status as a warlord of the sea and defected to the Oni show. It's an absolute disgrace. In the government's Hall of Power, one of the 5 elders could barely contain his fury. "Pirates can never be trusted," he thundered. "When we elevated her to warlord, we should have foreseen this possibility. Why didn't we simply crush Nine Snake Island while we had the chance?" Another elder's eyes narrowed. Had Nethin annihilated her at the outset, we'd be debating a footnote in our archives. Now her open betrayal deals a direct blow to the government's authority. If this goes on, the public will start to believe that the Oni show are more formidable than we are. That kind of thinking is intolerable. The room fell silent as the full weight of their failure settled over them. If they let this slide, the world government's dominion might crumble under the very chaos it once sought to control. When the pirate empress threw in her lot with Cypher Paul, Dr. Vegapunk had not yet perfected turbine-driven warships fitted with sea prism stone cores, vessels capable of breaching the calm belt. It was precisely the helplessness of Nine Snake Island, marooned amid those windless seas, that made its allegiance so vital. Now, however, Vegapunk's latest ships can slice through the calm belt as easily as any open sea. The windless zone is no longer an impenetrable barrier, and Nine Snake Island's natural defense has vanished. The Phantom Hand isn't a fool. With the Pirate Empress under his command, he'll be watching for any sign of betrayal. Sword in hand, Admiral Wu Laoxing stood silent, a cold light glinting in his eyes. Beside him, an officer spoke up. Exactly, the Phantom Hand could already be on Nine Snake Island. If we rush in with an invasion fleet, we'll walk right into a trap and suffer heavy losses. They argued back and forth, but reached no consensus. In the end, the world government set the entire matter aside, at least for now. Nethin remained on the island of the Nine Serpents for another week after it was formally recognized as a vassal state under the world government. During that time, he and Empress Hancock held in-depth discussions about the island's future, its development goals, governance structure, and long-term strategic plans. Nethin laid out every possible avenue: expanded trade, stronger defenses, cultural exchanges with neighboring islands, and investment in local infrastructure. Throughout their talks, he praised Hancock's leadership, her clear vision and unwavering generosity, and made it clear that, while the world government would regard the island as an ally, its internal affairs would remain entirely under Hancock's authority. They also agreed that, should the peace of the realm ever be threatened, the island of the Nine Serpents would dispatch troops to aid its new suzerain. With those terms settled, Nethin prepared to depart. A week later, at dawn's first light, Nethin's small sailing cutter slipped out of the harbor. Hancock was waiting on the pier, her cheeks tinged with rose beneath the morning sun. A gentle breeze lifted her dark hair, and for a moment her usual composure gave way to something softer, an unspoken warmth in her gaze as she bid him farewell. Out on the shimmering water, Nethin settled himself on the quarterdeck. The sails billowed quietly overhead. As the coastline receded, Nico Robin, having slipped aboard at the last minute, approached with a freshly purchased copy of the Newsbird Gazette tucked under her arm. She perched beside him and unfolded the broadsheet. "Look at this," she said, tapping a bold headline. 500 million berries. The government really must be furious." Nethin leaned forward, scanning the article, as the cutter cut through the waves, already plotting his next move. Nethin lounged on the polished teak deck of the Obsidian Tempest, a freshly printed newspaper spread out before him. The morning sun glinted off the metal hull as he scanned the bold headline. Empress of Chiwuhai abdicates title, becomes vassal of the 10,000 Kingdoms world government bounty, 500 million Baileys. He traced his fingertip under the words, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. The Empress was no lightweight, her strength was legendary, so 500 million Baileys felt surprisingly modest. Nethin chuckled softly. "Perfect timing, Robin," he said, handing the paper to his first mate. "Piss off the Big Five in one stroke. The world government will be thrown into turmoil, and those shadowy backers we've been watching, they'll have no choice but to reveal themselves." Robin folded the paper, his brow creasing. "Are you sure this isn't too reckless?" She just tore up the Chiwuhai Treaty and openly pledged fealty to the 10,000 Kingdoms. Now the other 4 emperors are on full alert, and so are the world government and navy. Our Ghost Hand pirates did seize the top spot after taking down Whitebeard's fleet, but this... He tapped the headline with a skeptical finger. Nethin leaned forward, grinning. "Exactly why it's brilliant. Everyone's watching their backs. No one sees us coming." He stood, letting the sea breeze whip his coat behind him. "Let the chaos begin." Nethin watched the chart flickering on the screen in front of him, his expression calm but calculating. "It all comes down to the S," he said, tapping the display that mapped every major power in the New World. Because the Ghost Hand pirates have grown so formidable, now openly allied with Germa 66 and the Pirate Empress, everyone from the Navy and the world government to the other 4 emperors is on high alert. He paused, letting the implication settle. Ordinarily, you'd expect these 4 great pirate crews, roughly equal in strength, to keep their distance from one another, preserving a delicate balance of power, but that equilibrium is already cracking. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Given the world government's intelligence network, it's only a matter of time before they unmask the pirate empress. If they do, they'll revoke Hancock's Shichibukai status and dispatch a fleet to besiege Kusanaka Island. Robin folded her arms, her eyes sharp. And you think there's a better way? Absolutely. Nethin's lips curved into a faint smile. Rather than waiting for the government to strike first, Hancock should abandon her title voluntarily. Once she steps down on her own initiative, the world, won't be so quick to suspect foul play. After all, neither Whitebeard's crew nor Red Hair's will make any sudden moves, and the Navy won't either. In fact, announcing her resignation at the right moment will create the kind of spectacular headlines that draw powerful allies to her banner. Robin considered this for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Nethin watched her, confident that once she grasped the plan's subtle mechanics, she would see its genius. With the pirate empress free of her government bindings and the Ghost Hand pirate's reputation untarnished by an overt naval assault, the alliance would flourish, and the world would have no choice but to acknowledge their rising power. After clearing away the dishes, Robin looked up with a playful smile. Hancock, when did you start calling the Empress by her first name? Nethin's face remained calm. A more familiar form of address will help close the gap between Wan Guo and Nine Snake Island, encouraging harmony and mutual support. Robin's lips curved into a teasing retort, but before she could speak, Nethin suddenly reached out. Startled, she lost her footing and tumbled into his arms. Holding her gently, he whispered, "It doesn't matter whom I address informally. You're the only one who may call me by my name." Robin didn't pull away. She tilted her head, amusement shining in her dark eyes as her long black hair fluttered in the sea breeze. Nethin felt a soft warmth in his chest, and almost without realizing it, he lowered his head toward her. Chapter 372, Hurricane. 19 years have passed since the dawn of the Great Pirate Era. Now, in its 20th year, and with less than 2 years remaining before the story's original timeline sets sail, Nethin finds himself 1 month back in the 10,000 Kingdoms. Over these past weeks, his willpower has nearly fully returned, and Murasame has settled into the role of overseeing a single soul incarnation. In fact, she's already preparing to forge a second one. A pressing question lingers, though. Can a soul incarnation consume the power of a devil fruit? To settle the matter, Nethin summons his 2 closest advisors, Trafalgaro and Caesar, for a private conference. For decades, the soul fruit, Sorusor no Mi, lay under Big Mom's control, its secrets locked away until her death finally released it into Nethin's hands. Neither Trafalgaro nor Caesar has direct experience with soul incarnations, but they both recall the first experiment Nethin performed. By means of a delicate mind exchange procedure, he replaced a person's consciousness and personality with that of another, proof enough that these incarnations can, in some sense, host and manipulate a soul. Now, gathered around a low stone table in Nethin's chambers, the 3 pore over scrolls and diagrams. Faint candlelight flickers across Murasame's frozen form, the blade's hilt still humming with latent energy. Outside, a violent wind begins to rise, the precursor of a storm so fierce it promises to shake the entire kingdom. Trafalgaro leans back, tapping a slender finger against his chin. If a soul incarnation can truly integrate a devil fruit's essence, its growth and stability would depend entirely on, Caesar cuts in, voice tight with excitement, the quality of the host, the nature of the soul, and the compatibility between fruit and vessel. We've never tested any of these variables together. Nethin meets their gazes, determination etched into every line of his face. Then we shall be the first. Prepare the rituals and secure the fruit. Tonight, we challenge the limits of life and power itself. A crack of thunder rattles the window panes outside. The hurricane is coming, and with it, a new experiment that could rewrite the laws of devil fruits and souls forever. Nethin watched intently as Caesar studied the glowing avatar of his soul manifestation, suspended in the containment field. After a moment's thought, Caesar spoke up. "Vegapunk proved you can fuse devil fruit powers into weapons," he said. "Why shouldn't we be able to graft one onto your soul manifestation?" Trafalgar Law folded his arms and shook his head. "It isn't that simple. Your soul manifestation isn't a material thing. It's a projection of your will. There's no physical form for devil fruit energies to latch onto. Caesar tapped his chin. But you've already done something like this. You merged your soul clone with the Mera Mera no Mi's flames and even the Den Den Mushi's lightning to create those homies. Binding a devil fruit to an entity should be easier than to a sword or cannon. Law cocked his head. Tell me one thing. Are you absolutely certain those homies weren't just living devil fruits? You know, eyeballs, mouths, the whole package. Caesar flushed. No, of course not. What Nithin wants is a weapon that obeys him, not a jabbering fruit. If we can't fuse the real devil fruit, I can at least extract its power in liquid form. Nithin's brow lifted. You mean the technique for eating a devil fruit through an object? Exactly. Caesar gave a thin smile. But it's not identical to consuming the fruit itself. That process only yields a condensed, liquefied version of its power. We'll need to stabilize it if we ever hope to merge it with your soul manifestation. What you're asking for is more abstract, which makes it harder. But it isn't impossible, Murasame replied. Nethin rubbed his chin, eyes narrowing in thought. All right, I'll first try to have a soul incarnation consume the hurricane fruit directly. If that doesn't work, I'll fall back on your me, thawed. He felt no real concern about risking the devil fruit. Thanks to his power to breathe life into dead objects, transforming them into homies, and to extract souls from corpses, he could always recover another host if one failed. Besides, even if a soul incarnation were destroyed, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Murasame could generate countless soul incarnations in theory, but in practice it could sustain only about half a dozen at once. It was like a fruit tree capable of producing hundreds of thousands of fruits over decades, yet never more than a handful at the same time. Until Murasame's strength grew further, 6 was the hard limit. Decision made, Nethin's hesitation vanished. He was ready to proceed. Nethin drew the soul-slaying blade Murasame, channeling his will into its edge. The power of his soul fruit began to bubble and condense, a phenomenon neither Caesar nor Trafalgar Law had ever witnessed at such close quarters. Both men fixed their gazes on Nethin's blade, watching intently as seconds stretched into 1, 2, 3. With each passing moment, Nethin's focused intent grew stronger. A strange, viscous substance welled up along the steel, twisting and writhing as though alive, poised to drip from the blade at any instant. Just when the mass reached its breaking point, Nethin brought Murasame down in a swift arc. In an instant, an unseen blade of ethereal light sliced forward, flinging the substance away. Slap! The odd mass struck the far corner of the chamber, slithering and bubbling as it pooled into a dark, shimmering slime. Law's expression remained impassive. He'd seen soul incarnations before, even crafted a hungry ghost path with his own hands. Caesar, on the other hand, peered closer with a mixture of fascination and hesitation. He recognized that the wriggling blob was Nethin's soul materialized, and out of a grudging respect and a healthy dose of fear, he dared not ask to dissect it. Instead, he simply watched in silence as the strange slime pulsed in the dim light. Nethin exhaled in relief once the second soul incarnation was complete. His first attempt had been rough, an immature sketch of what was possible. This time, however, he'd drawn upon that lesson and deliberately pushed the process to its limits, invoking the power of his soul fruit to carve out every ounce of potential. The result was a vessel at least 30% stronger than its predecessor. It strained his sword, Murasame, unbearably, but Nethin had high hopes. He didn't want another puppet like the hungry ghost homunculus. He craved something greater, a true homunculus that would hover at his side, faithful and powerful, reminiscent of Prometheus or Zeus themselves, and infinitely stronger than any mere construct. Taking a steadying breath, Nethin withdrew a hurricane fruit from his pocket. Its shell was a vibrant cyan, etched with a spinning storm motif, unlike any other natural devil fruit he'd seen. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the air. The fruit described a perfect arc before dropping into the open maw of the newly formed, slime-like incarnation. The creature closed its jaws around the fruit and swallowed. Nethin's eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was the memento of truth. If the fruit took, his second soul incarnation would ascend far beyond anything he'd imagined. Nathan watched in stunned silence as the strange, soul-bound form that had just consumed the devil fruit suddenly locked up. Its body convulsed, then collapsed inward in on itself until it was swallowed whole by the hurricane fruit. Moments later, 2 glowing eyes and a ragged mouth appeared on the fruit's surface. With a single eager bounce, the revived hurricane fruit opened wide toward Nathan. "This really is the last thing I needed," Nathan muttered under his breath. He fought to keep his hope alive. "Can you unleash your hurricane power?" The fruit bobbed twice, its motion a clear staccato no. Standing a few paces off, Trafalgaro and Caesar exchanged amused looks. Neither dared to laugh outright, but the core right nerves of their mouths twitched as they fought to hold it in. Nathan sighed, drawn blade gleaming. In one smooth arc, he slashed at the fruit. It shuddered violently. The eyes and mouth blinked out, and a writhing mass slithered free. In an instant, the creature reshaped itself into a gelatinous slime-like form. Calmly, Nathan stepped forward, picked up the battered hurricane fruit, and held it out to Caesar. "All right, your turn. Let's see if your method works better." Caesar nodded briskly, tucking the fruit under his arm as he headed for his laboratory. Chapter 373, Hurricane Incarnation. Inside the laboratory's pristine confines, Caesar stood before a precision extraction unit. He placed the hurricane fruit into the machine's chamber and pressed the activation panel. A sequence of gentle chimes echoed as the device pulverized the fruit into countless shimmering fragments, which then funneled into a waiting glass beaker. Prepared for the next step, Caesar carried the beaker to the test bench. He uncapped a sealed vial containing a deep violet liquid and poured it steadily into the beaker. The moment the purple fluid met the fruit mash, a sharp sizzle rang out. Unfazed, Caesar immediately reached for a second container, a vial of thick, emerald-green solution, and added it without hesitation. He snapped on the beaker's stopper. Inside, the mixture roiled and crackled, bubbles racing across its surface as if caught in a miniature storm. When the reaction finally subsided, Caesar removed the stopper and peered inside. The contents had coalesced into a viscous black syrup, studded with coarse residue and fragmented pulp. For the final purification, Caesar produced a sheet of what looked like cotton gauze. In reality, it was a woven filter of Hailu stone, stretched into impossibly fine threads, a rare and invaluable tool smuggled out of the base. He fitted the gauze into a specialized funnel and slowly poured the inky black liquid through it. As gravity drew the syrup downward, the gauze trapped every impurity, yielding a mirror-dark elixir of uncanny potency. Caesar tucked the filtered extract into a secure vial. Today's experiment had succeeded, another vital step toward unlocking the hurricane fruit's hidden power. Nathan watched intently as Caesar finished the last step. First, the viscous black sludge had been poured through the Hailu stone sieve. All the solid waste was caught in the mesh, leaving only a thick tar-like liquid behind. Caesar then added a few more drops of a strange reagent. Almost immediately, the mixture churned, releasing clouds of gas that evaporated into the air. When the froth cleared, only half a cup of glowing cyan liquid remained in the beaker. Caesar placed the beaker, also carved from Hailu stone, on the central workbench. Unlike ordinary glassware, this stone wouldn't let the new substance fuse with its walls. The strange devil fruit essence could meld with nearly anything else, but Hailu stone was its one safe container. Nathan's eyes shone with excitement. He'd watched Caesar's entire process, and now, at last, he seemed to understand what had eluded him before. Without hesitation, he waved his hand. From beside him, the slime-like soul incarnation slithered forward, its translucent form rippling as it approached the cyan liquid. With a swift motion, the slime engulfed the beaker's contents in one gulp. The moment the essence passed its amorphous boundary, the lab fell silent. Everyone sensed this trial would be unlike any prior attempt. Nathan's soul manifestation pulsed with the strange cyan fluid until, in an instant, it reshaped itself from a viscous blob into a small but ferocious whirlwind. The slime contracted wildly, shooting into the eye of the storm. Within seconds, the vortex swelled to the size of a basketball. Whoosh! A gale-force wind roared through the laboratory, rattling beakers and scattered tools as if caught in a tornado. Caesar's lips curved into a triumphant smile. "It worked," he murmured. Yet before he could savor victory, the winds intensified, tearing every object, papers, glassware, even stray sockets, into a spiraling dance. Caesar himself was caught in the maelstrom. He felt his body unravel into a shimmering gas, being drawn inexorably toward the vortex's core. "Ah!" he cried, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. He thrashed with all his might, but his strength was no match for the storm's pull. Just when hope seemed lost, Nethan plunged his hand into the churning cloud of gas. With unwavering focus, he gripped Caesar's scattered essence and yanked him out of the whirlwind's grip. "Master Net, Han." Caesar gasped, reconstituting into solid form at last, gratitude shining in his eyes. Caesar stood amid the wreckage of his laboratory, tears glistening in his eyes. Beakers lay shattered, wires dangled from broken consoles, and the pungent tang of spilled chemicals hung in the air. Across the room, Nethan watched the swirling vortex he had just summoned, his expression calm. Without turning, Nethan called over his shoulder, "Don't worry about rebuilding right now. You can recruit someone later to restore the lab. If you run short on supplies, just ask Luo." At that, Caesar blinked back his tears and managed a shaky nod. Relief washed over his face as the whirlwind began to contract in on itself, spinning faster but growing smaller. In moments, the colossal maelstrom was nothing more than a compact, tornado-shaped entity hovering in midair. Two bright eyes and a tiny mouth appeared on its funnel, and it fixed its gaze on Nethan. "Boss," it seemed to whisper. Nethan felt a faint but unmistakable resonance with this spirit form, an echo of immense power contained within the miniature storm. This wasn't an ordinary natural hurricane given shape. It was the living manifestation of a devil fruit, the hurricane fruit. Such a fruit granted its eater unrivaled command over wind and storm, a power that rivaled even the legendary ice and fire fruits. Satisfied, Nethan raised his hand in a casual wave. "Come on, little one." At once, the tiny cyclone darted toward him and settled above his shoulder, its swirling form now no larger than a carriage wheel. Just then, footsteps pounded on the metal catwalk outside. Reiju burst through the door, her pink hair whipping around her shoulders. "What happened? I heard an explosion." Her eyes went wide as she took in the ruined lab and the tiny storm companion now perched above Nethan's head. Nethan offered her a calm smile. "Everything's under control. Meet our new ally." Reiju blinked at the miniature tornado. "You made that?" He simply nodded, already turning to lead her out of the lab. Behind them, Caesar allowed himself a small, hopeful grin. Reconstruction could wait. Today, a tempest had been born. Nethan watched Reiju sprint toward him, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Hurricane Avatar, activate!" he called. In an instant, a swirling vortex of wind ripped through the training bay, roaring from floor to ceiling. Reiju hadn't expected a gale inside the base. The blast caught her completely off guard. She cried out as her uniform whipped upward. Instinctively, she tried to hold it down, but the force was too great. The fabric tore apart and flew away. Nethan's grin vanished. He hadn't meant to humiliate her, but the wind had been far stronger than he'd anticipated. Reiju, cheeks blazing, pressed her arms against her body. With a practiced motion, she tapped the transformation device at her waist. A slick, luminous liquid surged up her legs and torso, hardening in seconds into a full combat suit that restored her modesty, and then some. When the process completed, Reiju spun to face him, her eyes flashing. "Master Nethan, what on earth was that?" Nethan whirled toward his companion, glaring back at the dissipating whirlwind. "Look at what you made me do." The hurricane avatar floated beside him, its glowing form flickering with a hint of hurt. "But master," it protested, "you gave the order." Nethan froze, speechless, caught between blame and an uneasy truth. Nethan's probe latched onto the hurricane incarnation, and with a swift tug he dragged it out of the base. Reiju, momentarily stunned, quickly recovered and shot him a playful grin. "If you have something to say about my clothes, Lord Nethan," she teased, "you could have just asked. No need for theatrics. Of course, I'll obey your orders." Under normal circumstances, Reiju's lighthearted banter might have earned her a strict lesson in obedience, but not today. Nethan caught the hurricane incarnation by the collar, practically twisting its ears, and with a single step disappeared from the hangar. Reiju watched him vanish into thin air, then forced a small shake of her head. She still couldn't stop her cheeks from warming at the memory of her dress ripping earlier. Thankfully, she'd had underwear on, but the shock of it all still lingered. Moments later, Nethan reappeared high above the ocean, exactly 5,000 meters up, the midpoint between Sky Island Bika and Cake Island. He released his grip on the trembling incarnation and sent it hurtling into the open sky. "Be boss," the hurricane incarnation stammered, quivering as it plummeted through the clouds. Nethan snorted and gave him a cold glare. "All right," he said, "let's see what you're really made of. Give it everything you've got." Chapter 374, Two Moves. Nethan hovered in midair, eyes fixed on the trembling hurricane avatar before him. Despite its fear, the spirit could not refuse his command. Gathering every ounce of courage, it squeezed its eyes shut and roared, "Grade 8 Gale!" In an instant, the creature's head-sized form swelled outward, ballooning to several meters across. A titanic whirlwind exploded from its core, hurtling toward Nethan like a living tempest. Any ordinary person caught in that blast would have been sent hurtling off into the void, but Nethan remained unshaken. Drawing upon his distortion power, he anchored himself in place, fine-tuning the space around him to counter the gale's force. A faint smirk curled Nethan's lips. "Grade 8 Gale," he mused. "Such a dramatic name. I doubt you could even say it backwards." All the while, the hurricane avatar continued its eerie howls, the savage winds it unleashed, carving a clear path through the clouds for miles around. Nethan steadied himself, ready for whatever came next. Nethan felt a wild, surging power thrumming through his body. No proper technique, no refined skill. The hurricane avatar before him was nothing more than a formless maelstrom, incapable of true combat finesse. He frowned. There was no point trying to spar with a living storm. Summoning every shred of resolve, Nethan wrapped himself in a spiraling aura and strode straight into the gale. The wind howled its defiance, but he advanced steadily, closing the distance in a few determined strides. Then, reaching out with both hands, he seized the churning vortex. "Too scattered," he murmured, voice low and steady. He funneled the avatar's raw force into his right arm, letting its unruly energy coil around him like a living rope. Nethan focused on a single thought, and the hurricane's furious winds began to contract. What had been a towering pillar of wind, tens of meters tall, now collapsed inward with startling speed. In an instant, the storm shrank to the size of a human head. With a subtle gesture, he tapped into the void itself, and as if obeying a command, the miniature tempest solidified into a smooth, cerulean sphere, spinning gently in his palm. This orb was no mere illusion or minor wind trick. It was the essence of a fully unleashed hurricane avatar, compressed into a perfect blue globe. Nethan let the sphere hover above his hand, its quiet power humming like a captive storm. Whoosh! Nethan's form shimmered out of sight and reappeared high above the open ocean, several thousand meters from shore. In his hand gleamed a small, spinning orb, which he hurled straight down at the water's surface. The instant it struck, the pressure locked inside detonated, unleashing a furious shockwave in all directions. Within moments, a titanic cyclone roared into being, its whipping winds carving a dozen-meter radius of destruction. Seawater and fish alike were shredded into countless, razor-sharp fragments. No blood spilled, no trace left, proof of the orb's merciless cutting power. Nethan watched impassively. A power like this could rival Huang Yuan's legendary 8-foot Qiongguyu head-on. With such a weapon at his command, driving back even Kaido would be child's play. As the blast's wind pressure faded, its heart condensed into a compact spiraling tornado, the very embodiment of the storm he'd summoned. The tempest's personified form stared up at Nethan with mournful, pleading eyes. "Master," it seemed to sigh. Nethan allowed himself a wry smile. He'd hoped the elemental born of his soul incarnation would strike terror into hearts, not inspire pity. Yet here it was, his own storm spirit, looking far more forlorn than formidable. Nethan stared at the swirling vortex before him, grimacing. The hurricane incarnation didn't depend on flesh and bone. It existed solely on ethereal wind. It possessed almost no memory or independent thought. Compared to the ravenous puppet fashioned from Katakuri's body, this storm avatar was practically brainless. "Can you release that technique on your own?" Nethan asked, narrowing his eye. The hurricane incarnation paused, its winds slowing to a sputter. "Which move?" it replied, voice hollow. Nethan's heart sank. He'd nearly forgotten that the incarnation's mind was rudimentary at best, capable only of the simplest commands. Left to its own devices, it could barely sustain a breeze, let alone fight. He let out a low breath and squared his shoulders. If the incarnation couldn't act autonomously, he'd keep it tethered to him. He could tap into its power whenever he needed, summon gale force strikes at will, merge their forces to twist and rend any attack thrown his way. With the Hurricane incarnation's backing, he might even stand a chance against both Big Mom and Kaido at once. Taking hold of the flickering wind sprite again, Nathan focused inward. He closed his eyes and wove his will around the storm. If necessary, he'd bind it directly to his consciousness. No more fumbling, no more empty responses. Together, they would roar. Nathan raised his hand, and the Hurricane incarnation he'd summoned swelled around him. In an instant, it exploded outward into a roaring tornado, then just as quickly collapsed back into a compact sphere of swirling wind. This was his signature move, Hurricane Annihilation. Nathan flung the wind ball toward the open sea. Boom! A 10-meter-long fish happened to be swimming by. The moment the sphere detonated, its scales were stripped away, as though corroded, followed in rapid succession by flesh and internal organs. In the blink of an eye, there was nothing left but empty water. They had drilled this technique endlessly. Now the Hurricane incarnation could unleash Hurricane Annihilation all on its own, without Nathan's direct command. He hadn't expected his elemental avatar to master so many moves. In training it, he'd also unearthed new ways to expand its power. Hurricane Annihilation was a concentrated, almost single-target explosive strike, one even Kaido's beast form couldn't ignore. Its destructive force approached the level of Akainu's magma dog and fire-breathing techniques, delivered in a single, devastating burst. Nathan raised his hand. This calls for a coordinated, large-scale assault, a hurricane strike. Before him, the Hurricane incarnation hovered, tens of meters aloft, eyes closed, its lilting healing cry fading to silence. Its slender arms traced an arc through the humid air. The figure swelled, then snapped inward, collapsing into a roiling sphere of wind that hurtled toward the ocean's surface. Explosions of mist leapt as seawater was ripped into fog by the Avatar's raw, annihilating force. Nathan moved in a heartbeat. With a single thought, he halted the Hurricane incarnation's descent. He seized its swirling form, channeling the storm's power through his own will. In an instant, he and the Avatar vanished, only to reappear 100 meters above the churning sea. There, the storm swelled outward, the wind itself shimmering into a massive, clearly visible barrier. At Nathan's command, thousands of microscopic filaments of air, each sharpened to a blade's edge, breathed life through the gale. They streaked down in unison, an invisible blade storm slicing the water below. And then they laughed. Wherever the wind blades struck, the ocean split apart as if cleaved by countless silent swords. Each wave shattered in a flurry of spray and foam. A hurricane unleashed by a single will, cutting the sea to ribbons. In an instant, hundreds of slashes tore through the air. Though these wind blades didn't erupt in explosions like Huang Yuan's 8-foot Qiongouyu, each was forged by immense air pressure, granting it razor-sharp cutting power, every bit the equal of a master swordsman's blade. Below, the sea churned and fragmented under the relentless onslaught. Nathan watched the shattered waves, stroking his chin as he wondered how this technique truly measured up against Huang Yuan's fabled Ba-Chi Qiongouyu. Chapter 375, Princess Weiwei. Fighting two admirals at once is a Herculean task, especially when they both wield powerful natural-type abilities. Their combined might doesn't literally double, but their coordination is devastating. Take Admiral Qingji's Ice Age technique, unleashed at full power. Even emperors like Beast Kaido could only deflect it by drawing on every last ounce of haki, and their strength, speed, and ferocity still suffered under that relentless freeze. Now imagine if, in that moment, the Yellow Monkey Admiral had slammed into Kaido with a full-force assault. No matter how fearsome, Kaido would have been overwhelmed, forced onto the defensive, unable to mount any real counterattack. Today, Nathan faced exactly that kind of peril. Thanks to his unique spatial distortion ability, he could twist space around himself, rendering Qingji's icy barrage and the Yellow Monkey's heavy blows harmlessly out of sync. But relying on that trick alone offered him no lasting advantage in a prolonged duel. Everything changed the instant he tapped into his Hurricane incarnation. At that point, the winds rose, Reality itself bent beneath his will, and at last, Nethin felt the scales tip unmistakably in his favor. Hurricane Incarnation has no physical form, only a swirling cloud of wind, so its power is virtually limitless and it never grows tired. As long as Nethin lives, his Hurricane Incarnation cannot be destroyed. No attack can truly harm it. That is the terror of the Hurricane Incarnation. A fight lasting 3 days and 3 nights, or 10 days and 10 nights, is nothing to it. If he chose, Nethin could hover above the Navy headquarters and unleash an 8-force gale for 10 straight years. He calls this overwhelming assault multiple wind blades. He never bothered giving it a grandiose name like Wind River Era or Eightfold Cyclone Blaze. Multiple wind blades is clear and to the point. The moment the onslaught ends, the avatar condenses back into a cloud of miniature tornadoes. Although such a massive attack can't be maintained continuously, it only takes 10 seconds of recharge before he can unleash it again. There is no fatigue, no true cooldown. Nethin could repeat this devastating move indefinitely. Nethin surveyed his arsenal, a precise, single-target strike, a sweeping area attack, even a massive-scale barrage. What he lacked was a true long-range offensive. Hurricane Incarnation packed incredible power, but once formed it had to be unleashed on the spot, and it simply couldn't travel far. Wind blades could fly great distances, but their force waned over range, and they struck in scattered bursts, not one decisive blow. Frowning, Nethin drew on the tempest within. Under his command, the hurricane's raw energy coalesced, folding in on itself until it glowed like liquid sapphire. At last it condensed into a single fine filament of wind and light, humming with potential in his outstretched hand. When the storm thread reached its limit, his eyes flickered with resolve. With a deft motion, he launched it toward the restless sea. Almost instantly, the churning waves froze in mid-swell, as though time itself had been caught in a single breath. Then, in a thunderous crack, the ocean before him cleaved apart, revealing a yawning abyss that stretched to the horizon. A pleased smile curved Nethin's lips. "Lan Ren," he whispered, naming his new technique. Nethin had already perfected 3 devastating techniques that channeled the hurricane's power with almost no energy wasted: Hurricane Annihilation, Stormblade, and Mistblade. His next goal was to imprint all 3 techniques onto his hurricane avatar at once, an enormous challenge, like forcing someone to memorize whole vocabulary lists in a single session. One moment the avatar would recall Stormblade, the next it would forget and grasp Mistblade instead. Fortunately, Nethin himself was exceptionally strong. He endured every grueling training session alongside his avatar, day after day, pushing both body and spirit to their limits. Nearly 3 months later, that relentless effort paid off. The avatar, simple in thought but tenacious, finally mastered all 3 techniques at once. It no longer needed Nethin's direct command to summon any of them. It could now deploy each power independently. But Nethin didn't stop there. Drawing on both the hurricane's raw force and the twisting currents of distortion energy, he forged an even more formidable variant of Hurricane Annihilation. At its heart burned a brilliant white core of distortion power, and all around it spun a ring of razor-sharp wind blades, like a colossal, airborne fan capable of shearing through anything in its path. With this new creation, Nethin's arsenal had grown deadlier than ever. A swirling mass hovered in midair, its shape recalling the familiar form of a spiral shuriken, but this was no ordinary throwing weapon. When unleashed, its power eclipsed even the deadliest shuriken. The blast would lay waste to everything within a radius of hundreds of meters. They had arrived at Alabasta, the frontier of the first half of the Grand Line. Ever since Nethin had slain the warlord Crocodile, the Desert Kingdom had enjoyed a tenuous peace. Yet in these waters, safe is always a relative term, and danger lurked just beyond the horizon. Not far from shore, a battered pirate sloop eased into the harbor. On its weathered deck, a 14-year-old girl with sky-blue hair was lashed to the mast, a strip of cloth stifling her cries. She writhed against the ropes, her limbs straining, but the coarse fibers only bit deeper into her skin. A grizzled pirate lounged nearby, a smoldering cigarette dangling from his lips. He flicked ash into the wind, then turned to the captive with a cruel grin. "Save your strength, sweetheart," he sneered. "We'd never harm a hostage worth 1 billion berries. Tell me, Do you really think this backwater kingdom can cough up that kind of ransom? Nathan swaggered up the gangplank, a half-emptied wine bottle in one hand, hiccuping as he went. His crewmate, eyes narrowed to slits, gave him a sharp look. "It's a kingdom," the crewmate growled. "You really think raising 1,000,000,000 berries is impossible? And yet here we are, with a princess in our clutches. This Grand Line business isn't all it's cracked up to be." Below deck, Princess Nefertari, Vivi of Alabasta, shivered, her wrists lashed to the mainmast. She'd once walked her palace gardens freely. Now each tremor sent saltwater tears down her cheeks. The pirates who'd stormed in from the West Blue had dreamed of a palace heist, but palace guards had been waiting. In the end, there'd been only one choice: seize the princess and demand ransom. Their scarred captain emerged from the shadows, his voice low and menacing. "Don't get comfortable, princess. Alabasta may look independent, but it answers to the world government. The Navy could arrive at any moment. We'll give them 24 hours to come up with the money. After that..." He let the threat hang in the heavy air. A burly pirate beside the princess flicked his short knife twice, the steel glinting in torchlight. Vivi flinched as it sliced through the space before her throat. The man's grin was cruel. 1,000,000,000 berries, he spat. "Tell your government that. Good luck. Alabasta can barely scrape together its annual tribute, let alone this hefty sum." Nithin raised his bottle in a mock salute. "We'll be waiting," he slurred, though his eyes glittered with ruthless intent. As the pirates melted back into the hold, the deadline loomed over them all. One day to secure a fortune, or the delicate princess would pay the price. As the Princess of Alabasta, she knew all too well how crippling this ransom would be for her kingdom. Her hands were bound, and she clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles went white. Guilt and self-reproach threatened to overwhelm her, until a flash of movement in the distant sky drew her attention. High above, a pale, cotton-white cloud drifted toward her, and upon it rode a shadowy figure. What could that be? Chapter 376, Shadows over Alabasta. "Do you see it yet?" Nathan asked, gazing down at the island that drifted beneath a carpet of white clouds. He sat cross-legged at the bow of the Ghost Hand Pirate's flagship, his dark coat billowing in the breeze. Robin leaned forward, resting her elbow on her knee and her chin in her hand. Her eyes traced the pale outline of a vast desert palace and the surrounding dunes. "That must be Alabasta," she said softly. "It looks smaller than I imagined." Nathan nodded. Not long ago, Kaku and the 6th Division's intelligence team sent word that the world government's newest CP9 operatives are scouring the world for the blueprints of the ancient weapon Pluto. He paused, his gaze sharpening. "From what they've uncovered, those schematics really do exist." Robin's eyes flicked to him. "If the government gets hold of Pluto, it would be catastrophic." "Exactly." Nathan turned to face her. "Kaku filled me in right away. I already knew where the designs were kept. But blueprints alone won't summon the weapon. My real goal is to find Pluto's body." He rose, brushing sand from his boots. "With my own strength, and the Ghost Hand crew at my back, we'll claim it first. Even the world government won't risk a direct confrontation to snatch the weapon from us." Robin studied him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Then let's get to work. Alabasta holds more than just sand and secrets. If the relic's here, we'll find it." Nathan looked out again at the sun-drenched fortress on the dunes, determination hardening his features. "All right, Robin, ready the landing party. We move at first light." Below them, Alabasta waited, a kingdom of ancient legend, a prize coveted by empires, and the next step on Nethin's path to power. The Ghost Hand Pirates weren't about to back down just because the world government showed up. Nethin tapped lightly on the cloud beneath his feet. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary island cloud, but he had infused it with his soul, animating it into a living creature. The cloud homie hovered in midair like a skyship, easily matching the speed of any vessel at sea, and with Nithin's will, it could go even faster. "Let's go," he murmured, and the cloud dipped, bearing him toward the island's shore. Robin, riding on Nathan's shoulder, glanced ahead and saw a pirate ship cutting through the waves. But by this point in their voyage, a pirate vessel was hardly worth a second look. She'd seen plenty of them already, and none had caused her the slightest concern so far. Nethin, however, stole a quick glance of his own and froze. Strapped to the mainmast was a blue-haired girl dressed in regal silks, Princess Nefertari Vivi of Alabasta. He frowned, stroking his chin. At his current power level, only admirals or other top-tier pirates had the audacity to draw his real attention. Beyond those few, only the most pivotal figures in the world's grand storylines merited even a passing thought from him. Yet here was Vivi, an unexpected face thrust center stage on this rolling deck. What's going on here? He wondered, eyes narrowing. Something about this scene felt oddly familiar and deeply curious. Robin noticed the sudden shift in Nethan's gaze. "What are you staring at?" she asked, following his eyes down to the pirate ship cutting through the waves below. Nethan's surprise was faint but genuine. "Oh, nothing. I just saw something interesting," he replied, offering her a brief, knowing smile. No one aboard could have guessed that this calm young man was the very one who had slain the monstrous sand crocodile back in Alabasta. And yet, despite his victory, the desert kingdom was still mired in turmoil. And its princess, Vivi, was now in enemy hands. He let his thoughts wander to loftier goals, toppling the corrupt world government, forging a new realm that would bring all nations into harmony. If anyone could right Alabasta's wrongs, it was Princess Vivi. As the sole heir and a beloved figure among her people, she was the kingdom's true hope for peace and justice. Below, on the irate vessel's deck, a chorus of alarmed voices rose. "Hey, look up there!" someone shouted. "There's a person on that cloud." Robin and Nethan turned to see the crew pointing skyward. A single figure hovered on a pristine white cloud just above the island's treetops. The pirates' initial shock quickly tempered. After all, many of them had crossed the West Blue and encountered countless devil fruit powers. A floating cloud, though rare, was hardly the most astonishing sight they'd witnessed. Princess Vivi, standing close by, showed only mild curiosity. Having grown up among Alabasta's court advisors, some of whom wielded devil fruit abilities, she was no stranger to the strange and supernatural. Now, both sides held their breath, eyes locked on the silent figure above. What power did this stranger possess, and what role would he play in the events about to unfold? All eyes swung skyward the moment that swirling mass of white vapor appeared above the ship. At first, it looked like nothing more than a drifting cloud, but then it froze, motionless, at a height of perhaps 100 feet. A sudden hush fell over the pirates. In unison, they drew cutlasses, leveled flintlocks, and even fumbled for firecrackers, ready to greet whatever floated into their midst. Weiwei's heart pounded as she stared at the hovering cloud. It quivered, then slowly sank, revealing a flat, luminescent platform beneath. Standing on it were two figures, a man and a woman. The woman's face held no immediate interest, but the man was different. His features stirred a half-remembered echo in her mind. He met her gaze with unnervingly calm eyes. Weiwei felt herself rooted to the deck as he lifted one hand in a simple, deliberate gesture. The woman beside him responded instantly, arms rising and crossing before her in a peculiar stance, rigid and precise. Then, as if the very air had turned brittle, there came a sharp, staccato rattle, click, 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 followed by a sickening chorus of bones cracking. In that instant, every pirate realized they were no longer facing mere skyborne visitors, but opponents who commanded powers far beyond ordinary weapons. Nethan's jaw dropped as he took in the scene. Every pirate aboard the Jackal Pirates' Love ship was sprawled on the deck, their bodies grotesquely bent into impossible arcs, as though their bones had been twisted beyond human limitation. One by one, with dull thuds, they collapsed, Captain Jackal himself included. The infamous captain, who carried a 40 million Bailey bounty, lay motionless among his doomed crew. In an instant, the entire ship was silent. At that moment, Vivi realized two things at once. The ropes binding her wrists had fallen away, and the gag over her mouth had been torn free. She sat up, trembling, unable to believe her sudden freedom. Then a calm voice spoke beside her. "Let's go." She looked up. Nethan gave her a reassuring smile. Below them, a swirling cloud of milky white mist had appeared. Before she could ask a question, the cloud enveloped them, lifting them gently off the deck. Faster than the eye could follow, they swept away toward the shoreline, the pirate ship disappearing behind them. Only when the last wisps of cloud melted into the morning fog did Vivi fully grasp what had happened. She rushed to her feet, heart pounding, and ran to the ship's rail. Around her lay the silent, twisted forms of the fallen pirates, every one of them dead. She scanned the horizon, but there was no sign of Nathan or his companion, Robin. Who? She whispered to the empty air. Whoever they were, they had saved her life, and now they were gone. Wei Wei knew 2 people had saved her life, but she didn't even know the stranger's name, though the young man, Nathan, struck her as oddly familiar, as if she'd seen him somewhere before. Still dazed, she scanned the horizon, and another group of figures came into view along the coast. At their head strode her father, King Nefertari Cobra of Alabasta, flanked by the royal guards. They halted at the water's edge, all eyes fixed on the pirate ship beached just offshore. Beside Cobra stood Captain Timaeus, commander of the king's guard. The moment Timaeus spotted the vessel, his face shifted from authority to awed alertness. "Your Majesty," one of the guards murmured, "perhaps you should fall back." But Cobra remained unmoved. He stepped forward to stand before his men, arms folded, his gaze unwavering. To any onlooker, he seemed perfectly composed, but in his dark eyes, Wei Wei sensed a tense undercurrent. At last, the guards pressed down the makeshift gangplank and advanced onto the sand. As they drew near the ship's side, they found it deserted, no cutthroats or scoundrels in sight. Only Princess Wei Wei stood there, waving energetically as if she'd been waiting for them all along. Chapter 377. It's him. The early morning mist still clung to the royal shore when King Cobra's voice rang out, tense and incredulous. "You're saying 2 people wiped out an entire squad of jackal pirates?" Princess Vivi, her gaze distant, shook her head. "I don't know who they were. They simply appeared, cut through the pirates, and vanished before I could even speak to them. No chance to thank them, no clue as to their names." Cobra turned to the guard at his side. Cold sweat beaded on the man's brow as he struggled for composure. "Every pirate, their necks were snapped," the guard managed, voice hollow. "And it happened so quickly, just as Her Highness described." The king's eyes narrowed. He already knew these were no ordinary raiders, but the Jackal pirates, led by the notorious Captain Jackal and carrying a collective bounty of 42 million Baileys. To see them all killed without a fight was unthinkable. Adjutant Bell stepped forward, tone low and measured. "Your Majesty, I didn't witness the attack myself, but from what Her Highness described, the instantaneous snapping of necks, it strongly suggests the use of a devil fruit ability." King Cobra pressed his lips into a thin line, contemplating the implications. If Bell was right, then they were dealing with not just skilled swordsmen, but individuals whose powers could rival the most feared figures in the Grand Line. Princess Vivi's eyes flickered with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Whoever they are, they're dangerous." Cobra closed his hand into a fist. "Find out anything you can about these 2, and be ready. If they show up again, we must know whether to welcome them or prepare for a fight." Silence fell over the shore as the royal party absorbed the chilling revelation. From this moment on, their world had just grown infinitely more perilous. Being able to wipe out an entire pirate ship from a distance, that's not something any ordinary technique can accomplish. Cobra gave a thoughtful nod at Bell's words. "This is the Grand Line," he said. "Devil fruits aren't rare here. Bell's clearly one of them. His form is that of a falcon, a bird fruit user. He can fly." Wei Wei furrowed her brow, staring at the 2 strangers across the deck. "I feel like I've seen one of them before," she murmured. She only caught a brief glimpse. There hadn't been time to study their features before they vanished again. Now she was rummaging through her memories, trying to place where she'd encountered such power. Where could it have been? She wondered aloud. Everyone around her exchanged puzzled glances. Princess Wei Wei of Alabasta was known for her bright spirit and love of adventure. She had slipped out of the palace more than once in her youth, but at just 14 years old, she had far less exposure to the world beyond her kingdom's borders than most. Yet something about the strength she'd witnessed on that deck felt unmistakably familiar. Her cheeks flushed with effort as she strained to recall the moment. The answer lay somewhere in her past, but whether it was a visitor to the palace or a fleeting face in the crowd, she couldn't yet say. All she knew was that whoever those men were, their power had made an impression, and it was one she was determined to understand. Combining those 2 clues made it nearly impossible to identify their rescuers. They clearly weren't Marines, and they bore no cloak of justice. King Cobra frowned in thought and turned to Vivi. "What did you see?" he asked. Vivi shook her head. It was too dusty to make out any details, but their uniforms were nothing like the Navy's. No badges, no insignia, just plain clothes. Silence fell over the group as they exchanged puzzled glances. Cobra let out a slow breath and finally shook his head. "Regardless of who they are," he said in a low voice, "they saved your life. If fate ever brings us face to face, we must thank them properly." Vivi gave a small nod, though her brow remained furrowed. As she followed Cobra and the captain of the guard back toward the palace, her thoughts churned. The rescuers felt strangely familiar, yet she couldn't place them, an unsettling tangle of recognition and mystery. By the time their karoo set them down at the palace gates, evening had settled over Alabasta. Cobra dismounted, Vivi at his side, and they entered the throne room together. On the low table lay a dispatch already prepared for the guards. Cobra picked up the parchment and spoke to the nearest soldier. "Inform the Marines. The Jackal pirates have been wiped out." The guard saluted crisply. "Yes, Your Majesty." The guard at Cobra's side nodded in acknowledgement. At that moment, Wei Wei, who had been standing to Cobra's left, went perfectly still. Almost without thinking, she reached out and took the Jackal reward notice from her father's hand. "What's wrong?" Cobra asked, eyeing his daughter curiously. Wei Wei hesitated for a heartbeat, her gaze fixed on the parchment. Then a spark of recognition lit her eyes. "Father," she said, voice trembling with excitement. "I remember now. I think I've seen this person's name on a bounty notice before." "A reward notice?" Cobra frowned. He knew every name listed was either a notorious pirate or a vile criminal. "You're saying someone on this wanted list saved you?" He could hardly believe it. But Wei Wei gripped the document as if tethered to it by fate. "What about the government's archives, Father? They should have every issued bounty notice on record." Cobra hesitated. Though skeptical, he gave the order to call for an attendant. "Fetch the archives," he commanded. Then, settling back into his chair, he clasped his hands and steepled his fingers, the lines of worry deepening on his face. If the person who rescued his daughter was truly a pirate, what motive could drive such an act of mercy? He shook his head, unwilling to draw conclusions without evidence. But one thing was certain. The answer lay within that faded parchment, and he would uncover the truth. Since Nethan had been rescued at last, Cobra was determined to reward his savior, pirate or not. He motioned to his guards, "Fetch every bounty notice offering at least 50 million Baileys. Whoever brought Wei Wei back must be more formidable than the Jackal pirates themselves." Within moments, the guards returned with a thick stack of printed bounty notices. They'd culled the pile down to every reward above 50 million Baileys and laid them on the coffee table. Nethan leaned forward, scanning each notice in turn. The database kept them neatly ordered by bounty amount, 50 million Baileys at the top, then descending. He flipped the first notice over, then the second, the third, the 7th, the 16th, 31st. Page after page, he turned them swiftly, but none matched the face he remembered. Half the stack lay flipped on the table, and still no familiar bounty stared back at him. Nethan frowned, wondering how this mysterious rescuer had managed to slip through every record in the archipelago's vast archives. "Have you found him yet?" Cobra asked, sliding onto the bench beside Wei Wei and peering at the open bounty register. Wei Wei shook her head and kept scrolling. Dozens of wanted posters blurred past, each face unfamiliar, except one she couldn't quite place, Nethan's. But his bounty still eluded her. She hesitated as she passed Nico Robin's entry. The silhouette matched the woman she'd glimpsed earlier today, and for an instant her heart jumped. Then she shook herself free. She wasn't looking for the woman, she was looking for the man. Numbers climbed swiftly, 300 million berries, 400 million berries, until Wei Wei stopped cold at a 500 million berry reward. Cobra leaned in, eyebrows raised. "Are you sure?" he asked. "These aren't minor crooks. They're the biggest names in the New World, prime candidates for the 7 warlords of the sea, or even lieutenants under the 4 emperors. Some of them practically have admirals on speed dial. None have any reason or ability to come to your rescue. How could they possibly help you?" Wei Wei met his gaze, determination flaring in her eyes. She tapped toward the 500 million berry poster once more, as if summoning the man she was determined to find. Wei Wei wasn't the only one growing uneasy. Cobra, too, felt something was off. She'd been scanning the bounty logs for the pirate with the 1 billion berry reward, and very few names qualified. Maybe I misremembered, she murmured, flipping through the last few pages of the ledger. Red-haired Shanks, Kaido the Beast, Ghost Hand Nethan. Her thumb hovered over the final entry, and then, almost unconsciously, she flicked back one page. The face printed there made her freeze. She blinked, leaned closer, and her heart thudded so loudly she feared everyone would hear it. The room fell utterly silent. Taking a steadying breath, Wei Wei stared in disbelief. Then, with a trembling finger, she tapped the sheet. "I found him," she whispered. Cobra, who'd been lost in thought with his head down, jerked upright at her words. He glanced at the open ledger and, for the first time, really saw the wanted poster. His jaw dropped. "It can't be. Him?" "Yes," Wei Wei said, her voice barely above a breath. "It's definitely him." Vivi, standing just behind Cobra, let out a slow exhale. Cobra's face went pale as he stared again at the photograph and the staggering reward printed beneath it. Captain of the Guard, Adjutant Bell, and the other officers froze. They exchanged stunned looks, their hearts racing. 4 emperors? Could it really be the 4 emperors? Here in Alabasta, Chapter 378, Clues of Hades. Cobra and his guards broke out in a cold sweat. The 4 emperors, those 4 pirate warlords ruling the New World, were threats so great that even the world government dared not challenge them. Wherever they set foot, chaos followed. The captain of the guard stumbled back, eyes wide, as if he'd seen a ghost. Cobra drew a steadying breath. "Calm down," he said. "This man, Nethan, he once saved Princess Vivi. Maybe things won't be as bad as you fear." Bell, standing at Cobra's side, lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, should we inform the world government immediately?" Cobra shook his head. "No. The Navy will arrive on its own soon enough, which could actually make matters worse. The 4 emperors are considered top-tier threats by Marine headquarters. Sending a ship or 2 won't tip the balance, and if a clash breaks out here in Alabasta, our kingdom could be caught in the crossfire." He glanced around, worrying. "The only relief is that Nethan shows no hostility. He rescued Vivi on his way here. What I can't figure out is why he's come to Alabasta in the first place." Bell nodded. "Understood. We'll handle this quietly and avoid any unnecessary alarm." Bell bowed and slipped quietly from the throne room. "Don't search for them overtly," King Cobra had warned. "Send scouts to shadow them in secret and report back the moment they surface." Just beyond the western edge of Alabasta's royal palace stands the Great Funeral Hall, also known as the Royal Tomb, a cavernous sanctuary of marble pillars and hushed reverence. Flickering torches cast long shadows across the polished stone floor, and every carved relief seems to watch the intruders with solemn indifference. Inside this vast chamber, Nethan and Robin moved carefully along opposite walls, their eyes scanning for any sign of a hidden stairway. Robin, having spent little time within Alabasta's ancestral crypts, had never seen its secret entrances. Nethan, too, was unfamiliar with the precise layout. But both were keen observers, and their progress was methodical rather than forced. They knew that, if worst came to worst, they could always draw their blades and cleave through the tomb's stones, but neither wished to desecrate the royal dead. After all, it was for Princess Vivi's sake that they had come, and they would not risk trampling her ancestors' resting place. Robin paused before a segment of wall whose mural seemed ever so slightly misaligned with the surrounding reliefs. Reaching out, she traced her fingertips over a barely perceptible seam. "Here," she breathed. Her hand pressed against the carved diadem at the center, and with a soft click, a hidden panel slid inward, revealing a narrow shaft that led down into darkness. Nethan pried aside the loose flagstone on the funeral hall's floor, revealing a narrow opening carved into the earth. "This is it," he murmured, peering into the darkness. "Let's go down and take a look." Without hesitation, he slipped through the gap, undeterred by the thought of traps lurking below. Robin paused only for a moment. She knew the intelligence division had uncovered whispers of Pluto, the ancient weapon, somewhere in Alabasta, but they'd never been able to pin down its exact location. Now Nethan seemed to know this hidden passage by heart. She shook off her unease and followed him down the crude stone steps. At the bottom, torches set into alcoves cast flickering light across a cavernous chamber. At its center stood a solemn structure of weathered stone. Directly before it rose a massive square stele, its surface carved through with ancient script. Robin's pulse quickened. As she stepped closer, her eyes gleamed with excitement. Gently tracing her fingers over the inscriptions, she began to decipher each line, hoping they would finally reveal the secret of Pluto. Nethin had spent the entire day poring over ancient records, royal archives, clandestine reports, even forbidden tomes, trying to piece together a century's worth of half-lost history. He knew more now than most, but the final fragments of the puzzle still eluded him. What was Pluto, and where had it been hidden? He stood before a massive stone stele, its sides etched with lines of archaic script, and motioned for Robin to join him. Robin stepped forward and ran a fingertip along a carved passage in the tablet's lower corner. His brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, his eyes flickered with recognition. "Here," he said, voice low. "I'm almost certain this is a reference to Pluto. It points to Alabasta, right along the coast." Nethin's pulse quickened. "Alabasta," he repeated. "The desert kingdom ruled by Princess Vivi. If this lead is true, that's where we must sail next." Robin nodded. "Everything lines up, the old trade routes, the naval patrols, even the seasonal winds. It all converges on Alabasta's shoreline." Late that afternoon, a marine warship crept into the harbor off Alabasta's sandy coast. Smoke curled from the cigarettes clenched between Colonel Smoker's lips as he leaned over the rail, studying the scene ashore. Not far away lay the hulk of a pirate vessel, and on the beach were the bodies of dozens of pirates. Their defeat recent, but the threat clearly underestimated. On the sand, a contingent of Alabasta's royal guards hurried forward. At their head was Captain Nefertari, regal even in her fatigues. She saluted crisply. "Colonel Smoker," she greeted. "Thank you for coming so swiftly. Her Highness the Princess is safe and unharmed." Smoker extinguished one cigarette beneath his boot, the other still glowing. He gave the guard captain a curt nod. "Good, we'll secure the area and see to these remains. Then we'll escort Her Highness back to the capital." Captain Nefertari inclined her head once more, relief softening her features. "We're grateful, Colonel. Please let us know if you require anything else." As the Marines disembarked to tend to the fallen pirates, Smoker took a long drag and surveyed the desert horizon. Somewhere beyond those dunes lay greater secrets, and a mythic power known as Pluto. If the stele had been right, Alabasta was only the beginning of their journey. Nethin nodded toward the grisly pile of bodies on the deck. "The pirates have all been neutralized. They're waiting for you to inventory them." Smoker's brow tightened. Any other naval officer would have been overjoyed. No fight, no risk, and all the credit handed to them on a platter. But Smoker had hunted these pirates across 3 seas. To learn they'd already been wiped out, and now he was stuck with the thankless task of cataloging the corpses? It rankled. He said nothing. "Mr. Smoker," a crisp voice called from behind him. He turned to see Sergeant Dasiki, freshly minted from the academy and still wearing the eager look of a new recruit. Her glasses caught the harsh deck lights as she snapped a salute. "Permission to begin the inventory, sir." "Granted," Smoker replied. Dasiki fell in beside a squad of Marines and moved toward the bodies. They fanned out, steel boots thudding against the planks as each Marine steeled themselves for the grim work. Dasiki paused at the edge of the heap, her eyes scanning the tangle of uniforms and weapons. Almost immediately, her face drained of color. A cold sweat beaded at her hairline, and a strangled scream rumbled up her throat. "Mr. Smoker!" she cried, voice cracking with alarm. He turned on his heel, eyes narrowing. "What is it, Sergeant?" Smoker's frown deepened at Dasiki's scream. He strode toward her voice as she took a steadying breath, fighting down her shock. "Look at these bodies," she said, voice low but urgent. "Each one's neck is snapped, killed with a single blow." He knelt among the corpses, his face impassive. He'd seen too many mutilated crews in his career, throat wounds, slashes, stab marks. Nothing about this scene surprised him. "So what's unusual?" he asked. Dasiki pointed at one figure. "That man there, Jackal Gezi, the West Sea Overlord, 42 million belly bounty. He's been murdered the same way." Smoker's eyes narrowed. He crouched closer, scrutinizing the brock and neck. A single powerful strike could do it, of course. That wasn't beyond skilled hands. But every soul on this ship killed identically? A surgical sneak attack might explain one or two, but the entire crew? That defied all odds. Chapter 379. Who did this? One of your men. Smoker's voice was low and sharp as he turned to face the Alabasta Guard captain. The captain hesitated, reluctant to meet Smoker's gaze. I'm sorry, sir. We don't know. Smoker's jaw tightened. The captain spread his hands in a helpless gesture. We did everything we could to rescue Her Highness. We fought those pirates to the last man, yet when we finally broke through their ranks, every pirate was already dead, and the princess was safe. Princess Vivi's eyes widened. That's how it happened. But even so, how could you not know who saved me? Surely your highness must remember. The captain bowed his head. Her highness does remember. She says it was a man and a woman, but she has no idea who they are. Smoker's gaze narrowed. So they weren't Alabastans, outsiders. The captain nodded gravely. Smoker fell silent for a moment, staring off into the distance. To fell Gurs the Jackal with a single strike, no ordinary pirate could do that. Whoever they were, they had to be famous, even on the Grand Line. According to the guard captain's report, the stranger, Nethan, had stumbled upon that pirate band by chance, rescued the princess, and then slipped into Alabasta. Admiral Dashiki ordered his men to clear away the bodies and turned to Captain Smoker. Smoker, what's our next move? Smoker paused, the faint curl of smoke drifting from his nostrils. When he spoke, his eyes shone with curiosity. We follow him into Alabasta, he said. I'd like a closer look. Saving the princess is one thing, but doing it so conveniently, there could be more going on. Ordinarily, anyone who rescues Alabasta's heir would stay for the royal reward. Yet this man and his companion vanished without as much as a name. That's not normal. Dashichi nodded in agreement. Once the shore was cleared of corpses, he left a detachment behind to guard their warship while he and Smoker led the rest of the navy onto Alabasta's sands. Naval vessels were so familiar in these waters that their arrival caused no stir. Alabasta looked exactly as it always did, sun-baked, bustling, and utterly unchanged, yet beneath its calm surface, new mysteries were already stirring. Smoker had spent the entire morning leading the Navy on a sweeping patrol through the streets of Alabasta. Yet, no matter how hard they looked, there wasn't a trace of the two pirates they'd been tracking, or anyone else out of the ordinary. They've simply vanished, Smoker muttered, brows drawn together in concern. The longer he searched without success, the stronger his unease grew. After so many years in the service, his instincts rarely misled him, and right now they were screaming that something was very wrong. At his side, Lieutenant Tashigi, her face lined with fatigue, lowered her voice. Captain, how about we take a break? Grab a bite to eat? Smoker paused, then gave a weary nod. Fine, let's eat. A few of the sailors pulled rations from their packs, but several senior officers suggested sampling Alabasta's local fare. Before long, Smoker and Tashigi found themselves stepping into a handsome, white tablecloth restaurant that rose of the more modest inns lining the street. Inside, the air buzzed with muted conversation and the clink of fine tableware. Seated at one of the corner tables was Nethan, quietly sampling dish after dish. He leaned forward, a small smile of genuine surprise brightening his features. He had always assumed a desert kingdom like Alabasta could offer little in the way of memorable cuisine, yet the rich spices, tender meats, and fragrant sauces told him otherwise. For the first time that morning, Nithan felt something like hope. Nithan and Robin stepped out of the funeral hall, but instead of hunting for the ancient weapon Pluto right away, they decided to find something to eat. After soaring all the way from Cake Island to Alabasta, neither of them had tasted a proper meal. They made their way to a modest seaside tavern, settled into a corner table, and ordered a hearty spread. Nethan dug into a platter of roasted meat as soon as it arrived. The spices were unfamiliar but delicious. Robin nodded in approval and took a bite of her own serving. Just then, her expression flickered. She glanced toward the door, positioned so she could see anyone entering, and froze for a moment. Two Marines in crisp Navy uniforms had just come in, a tall man and a woman, both carrying the calm confidence of trained soldiers. Robin's jaw tightened, but only for an instant. In her current state, only the appearance of a high-ranking naval officer would really faze her, and even then, Nethan stood at her side. No single admiral would dare show up alone to cause trouble. These two were almost certainly just here for a meal, nothing more. Nethin noticed Robin's gaze shift but didn't turn around. He sliced off another piece of meat, chewed thoughtfully, and asked, "Everything all right?" Robin smoothly brushed a lock of hair behind her ear and offered a small smile. "It's nothing," she said, returning her attention to the food in front of her. Dasichi was just about to place her order when she caught sight of the newcomer and froze. Robin sat a few tables away, his brimmed hat pulled low and his head bowed. The angle made it impossible to see his face clearly, but something about him felt familiar. As a naval officer, her first duty was to remember a wanted pirate carrying a bounty. Convinced she'd seen him before, Dasichi set the menu aside, rose, and stepped forward. Tilting her head, she studied him intently, despite knowing it was impolite to stare. Robin, unfazed, lifted his teacup in one hand and took a leisurely sip, his eyes drifting closed. At the same moment, Nethin, who'd been seated nearby, raised his head and spotted both Dasichi and Smoker approaching. Nethin's brow lifted in mild surprise, but he composed himself, returning to his vegetables and tea as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Dasichi adjusted her glasses on the bridge of her nose and, after a moment's hesitation, spoke in a measured voice. "You wouldn't happen to be Nicole Robin, would you?" Robin set his cup down with deliberate grace and offered her a gentle, knowing smile. "You guessed it, Marine." Dasichi's eyes narrowed. With a sharp clang, she drew the sword at her waist and leveled it at Robin, every muscle in her frame taut with vigilance. "Nicole Robin," she demanded, voice cold, "Captain of the 6th Division of the Ghost Hand Pirates, what are you doing here?" Robin gave a light, amused chuckle. "I'm here for a meal, of course, and you might want to lower that blade." She didn't need to move a muscle. The power of the Hana Hana no Mi flared to life. Dozens of ethereal arms sprouted from Robin's body in an instant. They swept aside Dasichi's sword, then clamped down on Chi's wrists, wrenching her arms behind her back and lifting her chin so her face felt exposed and helpless. Dasichi thrashed and struggled, cheeks flushing with anger and humiliation, and perhaps a flicker of fear, but the phantom limbs held her fast. Before Chi could gather her strength, a second weapon shot in from behind. It struck with brutal precision, shattering the ghostly arms into drifting petals. Robin cocked her head and leaned her cheek on her hand as Smoker stepped forward. "Sea stone, huh?" she observed lightly. Smoker met her gaze, his expression shadowed with irritation, but his arrival had made the difference. Nethin's eyes widened as the heavy door swung open, and the notorious captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates stepped inside. Even Smoker, leaning against the far wall, straightened in surprise. "I didn't expect you here, Nico Robin," Smoker said, voice low and dangerous. "What's your purpose?" Robin offered him a lazy, knowing smile. "Is it really so hard to guess? I came for dinner." She swept a hand toward the teacups on the table. Smoker snorted. "Dinner?" He crossed his arms, indifference flickering across his face. After a moment, his expression hardened. "Since you won't confess your crimes, I'll have to arrest you first, and then make you talk." At the Laz, T-word, his forearms disappeared in a roiling cloud of smoke. In their place formed the twin tips of his deadly weapon, 10-hand. In a blink, the smoky hands surged forward, sweeping over Nethin's head, and aimed straight for Robin's temple. Nethin yelped and leapt back, sending his chair skidding. Robin, meanwhile, remained unnervingly calm. With one hand, she tilted her teacup to her lips. With the other, she brought her foot sharply down on the table. The impact sent tea tumbling, and sent the entire table sliding between her and Smoker's weapon. Robin took a measured sip, eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. "Well, that was close." Smoker's scowl deepened. Realizing his attack had been foiled, he dissolved into smoke and reformed behind her, launching a flurry of lashes from his 10-hand weapon. The sharp crack of steel on wood and the clatter of overturned chairs filled the air as the two adversaries plunged into battle. Dasichi's hand shot for her sword as she leapt to her feet, ready to rush to Smoker's side. But then she caught sight of the lone man still eating at a battered corner table. He didn't flinch as Robin and Smoker traded blows across the restaurant. Chairs splintered, walls shook, and terrified diners poured into the street, yet he calmly brought another forkful to his lips. Her pulse quickened. The guards in Alabasta had warned of a deadly duo who'd massacred the Jackal pirates, a woman and a man. Here was Robin fighting fanned-out smoke with Smoker. And here was this man, stoically dining amid the chaos. Could he be the phantom hand pirate they whispered about? Desiki's grip tightened on her sword's hilt. She took a cautious half-step back, studying him more intently. All around them, people were screaming and fleeing, but the stranger remained utterly composed. From his side profile, his skin was neither too pale nor too dark, his features perfectly balanced, though not conventionally handsome. Yet there was something in his carriage, a quiet dignity, a subtle aristocratic air, that set him apart from any common sailor or ruffian she'd known. For a heartbeat, suspicion warred with curiosity. Then Desiki shook herself free of distraction, squared her shoulders, and advanced once more, blade raised and eyes locked on the unflappable diner. This time she would learn exactly who he was. Nethin's face came into full view, and Desiki's hand trembled so violently that she almost cried out. Her sword wavered in her grip. "Hey, don't ruin my appetite," Nethin muttered, stabbing a generous chunk of roasted meat with his fork. He lifted it to his lips, chewed deliberately, then looked up at her. Desichi forced herself to steady the blade, though her heart hammered with irrational fear. She raised her sword, ready to strike, but the steel shook so badly it was barely under her control. Nethin polished off that bite, swallowed, and shook his head in mock exasperation. "I have to say, your navy really knows how to make an entrance. Now, what brings you all the way to Alabasta?" Desiki opened her mouth, tried to answer, but no words came. Nethin shrugged and went on, as if he hadn't even noticed her silence. "I still remember our little quarrel back at that restaurant. You told me that since you'd spotted Robin, you'd know I'd turn up here and that you'd be ready to fight." He stabbed another piece of meat and chewed. "Honestly, I never planned to harm a single Marine." He finished chewing, leaned back, and regarded Desiki calmly, half amused, half bemused, while she struggled to steady both her sword and her racing pulse. Nethin paced before her, hands clenched into fists. His eyes burned with a mixture of frustration and resolve. "You've been holding it in all this time," he snapped. "And look where it's gotten us. Is pride that important to you? At this point, neither of us can back down. I'm one of the 4 emperors. I can't just turn and run when I see your navy fleet bearing down on me. Likewise, your navy would never stand by and watch my power grow unchecked. Sooner or later, this all comes to Navy headquarters for a decisive battle." He paused, leaning in so close that Deshichi caught the faint scent of salt water on his coat. "You said yourself," he continued, voice dropping low, "if I win, do you even want the Navy to keep existing?" Deshichi stared at him, mouth half open. Nethin's words crashed over her like waves against a rocky shore. He was a pirate, she reminded herself, a madman, ranting wildly. Yet the certainty in his tone left her with no room for argument. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice refused to come. A battle at Navy headquarters. The very idea sent a chill through her. If he truly was one of the 4 emperors, and if he triumphed, what hope would be left for the Navy she'd sworn to defend? As a mere sergeant, she had no answer. All she could do was watch him, her heart pounding in her ears, and wait.